This episode of Astrology Hotline is brought to you by Newsly. If you're anything like me, you like to stay informed on what's going on in the world. In fact, paying attention to current events and watching how they correlate with transiting planets is a great way to learn astrology. But as you might know, it can be a bit of a struggle to find time to actually sit down and read all the latest articles. But not anymore, thanks to Newsly. Newsly is an audio app for iOS and Android that picks up web articles from the most trending topics on the web at any given moment and reads them to you in a natural human voice, liberating those busy thumbs and eyeballs of yours for, that other stuff you gotta do. For the first time in the history of the internet, the web becomes listenable. So, say goodbye to copying articles and pasting them into BonziBuddy. Just browse Newsly for articles from topics of your choice and start playing. And that's not all. With Newsly, you can explore trending podcasts from over 40 countries. Now, I know you're probably asking, but Kyle, does it have my favorite podcast, Astrology Hotline? You better believe it does. All you gotta do is download Newsly free from www.newsly.me. And to top it all off, you get a 1-month free premium subscription by using promo code Astrology2021. That's astrology with zeros instead of O's. 2021. Stop scrolling and start listening. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to Astrology Hotline, the podcast where we answer your questions about astrology. My name is Tristan, and hosting with me today is Kyle Pierce.
Hello.
How are you doing today, Kyle?
I'm doing quite well. Just had my Frappuccino, so I'm feeling pretty good. How are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. I haven't had a Frappuccino, so maybe not as good as you, but no complaints otherwise. It's kind of a dreary day here, and my efforts to feed the local bird population before winter strikes are being thwarted by my backyard chipmunk.
What is the chipmunk stealing the bird food?
Oh yeah, I mean the chipmunk is getting all of the bird food.
He's
She's
like
just
hawk.
jumping up there and stuffing her cheeks and leaving and then coming back for another. She's just she's hoarding it all. She's transferring it from the bird feeder to wherever her food stash is.
Chipmunks gotta get prepared for the winter too,
They do.
I have maybe some extreme opinions about birds, so I might be on the chipmunk side in this case. But
Right, you're not.
They're dinosaurs.
I mean, that's why I love them.
They're evil.
They're evil. Did you never go through the dinosaur phase as a kid? You don't think dinosaurs are cool?
No, I think dinosaurs are great, but they're extinct, and I'm glad that they're extinct. I don't want dinosaurs around.
Well,
I don't think anybody wants a pet dinosaur because it'll probably eat your head.
well,
Birds would totally eat your head if they were big enough. They'd bite it right off.
I've seen some pretty aggressive emus, so
yeah.
You might not be wrong on that.
They have reptile brains. They're flying rats, spreaders of disease.
Oh my goodness.
They're beautiful though.
They're spreaders of disease, but they're beautiful.
I think we've had this conversation before where, which actually I've been into because I've been listening to a lot of like ghost stories and stuff for Halloween coming up. So I'm getting in the spirit. And, people get like messages from birds, from spirits, and they're like kind of a long historical trend of birds being like messengers from the other side. And it's maybe why I don't get any, because I hate birds so much.
Yeah, you might get some valuable information from the spirit world if you just let birds alone. Give them a chance.
I am fine with birds overall. I just, in the morning when they start chirping so early, it's so disturbing. It's just like these little noises, like in the morning when you're trying to sleep, like the really early morning.
Yeah, I don't know that.
Though you get up at what? Maybe that's why you get up. Maybe it's the bird's fault that you get up so early every morning.
It's the window cleaner's fault. It's my partner who gets up early in the morning to go out and clean windows every day.
Ah,
He's the bird that gets me up.
yeah. Well, yeah. I don't trust morning people. No, no, I'm kidding. But I have never been a morning person, and yeah, birds get in the way of that.
That's understandable. I can respect that. I can respect wanting your peace in the morning. Yeah, it's interesting how in it's sort of a trope in movies where the protagonist starts off not being a morning person and then they go on this whole adventure and it's life changing, and then by the end of the movie they're up at the crack of dawn cooking breakfast or whatever, and this is supposed to be like a demonstration of how they've like grown into themselves, and I kind of resent that because it
Yeah,
implies that people who are not morning people are like somehow less advanced. Like being a morning person is something
yeah.
we should strive for, and it's like it's actually a matter of your inherent biology, which is not under your conscious control. Is not a
That is
virtue.
absolutely
Being a
true.
morning person is not a
Hmm.
virtue any more than being a night
It ends up
person
being a
is.
benefit.
Yeah, it works in
Yeah.
the current context of most of our
I wonder if you
working
get. Yeah.
lives.
Now I want to like see how that could look in a chart. I don't know. But that
See,
yeah, it seems very much like like the dignity system in some way. Like just by virtue of like your nature, you just happen to fit into what society likes.
maybe this is a manifestation of my partner's exalted sun in Aries conjunct Jupiter, is that he's able to be a morning person.
Yeah.
It's what
I
is
mean, you both have
favored by
Sun and Aries.
society. Yeah, but I'm not. I mean, I'm a like midnight to 9 a.m. or like 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. kind of person.
That's nice. That's
I'm not an
good.
early morning person, but
I mean, if you take away all obligations from me, I'm like a 4 a.m. to noon person. It's when I would like my body wants to sleep. Around dawn when the birds start chirping and don't let me go to sleep. Though I don't get to do
well,
that now
if
anyway. So thank you, birds, for
yeah,
making
no,
that
they're trying to
much
help
more
you.
unsustainable
They're
for me.
making sure making sure you get to work on
Yeah.
time. They're just looking out for you.
Mhm.
I would certainly be curious to know if either of our question askers this episode are morning people, because our querents, because there's a lot of cardinal energy happening in this episode, lots of cardinal sign action going on.
Yeah, it's a good, nice segue, Tristan. Um, yeah, that
You're welcome.
sort of brings us into our first question. So our first question comes from Jet, and Jet has a cardinal grand cross in her chart, and would like to know more about grand crosses in general, but a little more focus on cardinal grand crosses in particular. And she has also shared her chart with us, which is a pretty awesome example of a grand cross. So we'll yeah. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of grand crosses, Tristan?
Um, the key words that come to mind for me are dynamic tension, and how that plays out obviously depends on the planets involved in the Grand Cross and the mode that they're in. I feel like it'd probably be helpful, in case we have listeners who are very new to astrology, to define some of our terms first. So maybe we can explain what a Grand Cross is and what cardinal means, because the modes are important when it comes to Grand Crosses.
Yeah.
So a Grand Cross is an aspect pattern. It is formed by four planets that are all in the same mode. Um, the three modes are cardinal, fixed, and mutable. So all 12 signs of the zodiac can be divided into these three modes. And signs that have the same mode will either square or oppose one another by aspect, which is a tense sort of aspect, a challenging aspect. Both the opposition and the square are associated with the malefic planets. So not as like easy and comfortable as the other aspects that could happen in a chart. So the signs that are configured by a grand cross all have mode in common, so they do have something in common, but there can potentially be some disagreement about what goal should be achieved with the energy they have, what sort of direction they should be going in. There can be some sort of competing interests happening. And it's pretty easy to spot a grand cross in a chart. If you're looking at the pattern of aspects in the middle of a chart, you'll see a great big square with an X in the middle, because you'll have two axes of opposition and 4 squares between all 4 of these planets all configured to each other.
Yeah. 4 squares and 2 oppositions.
Exactly. I feel like that was probably a really long-winded explanation.
No, I mean, no, and that's the essence of a grand cross. But I guess there's like other things I like to consider just in not just grand crosses, but like interpreting squares and oppositions. When you think of how the house system is set up, what are the powerful houses, the most energetic houses? They're the angular houses, the 1st, the 4th, the 7th, and the 10th. So, squares and oppositions involve a lot of energy. They're powerful. And maybe depending on the planets involved and their relationship to each other, it could be more positive or more negative, more challenging. But I guess it's good to consider how powerful can be different than favorable, or powerful. Powerful isn't always easy, It's not always smooth.
And I think that's a common interpretation of the Grand Cross, is that it is an aspect pattern that takes a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. But also, there's so many factors involved in interpreting any given Grand Cross, but it also involves a lot of energy, which can be a good thing. I think the challenge, given how there is sort of a conflict built into all these squares and oppositions, is figuring out how to channel that in a positive way. I don't know. My son has a Cardinal Grand Cross. It's actually a very tight one, and it's funny watching him play video games because he is never sitting down while he's playing, and he's always jumping and talking while he's playing. He's doing all these things at the same time while playing this game, and that's kind of like what a Cardinal Grand Cross in particular, but Grand Cross in general is it's like multiple impulses or multiple intentions that are kind of at odds, like when I sit and play video games, I sit and I hone in on the game, If you try to talk to me while I'm doing that, I'll probably get annoyed with you. And while Declan likes to talk to you while he's playing the game, he likes to talk to himself while he's playing the game, likes to move around. I would say that there's always a way to kind of manage that energy. Or I think traditionally, a lot of what makes a square more difficult is the lack of affinity, I guess, between the two elements. Like Aries, a planet in Aries would be squaring a planet in Cancer. So one is fire and one is water. And two very different elements. So, you get boiling water, I suppose, but water could also put out the fire. They sort of destabilize to some degree, but they also promote change. The interaction promotes change, while, a stabilizing trine is going to maybe promote a more stable movement, more stable I don't want to say status quo, but like a trine is like, starting a job and getting a promotion after, a certain amount of time or getting a steady raise, um, getting along with your coworkers, while like a square might be like a sudden job change or, getting in a conflict with your boss and maybe your boss gets fired and then you get to take their job or something, or the other way around.
I think that's all excellent. I love the description of a grand cross being sort of like multiple impulses that are all trying to express themselves at once and all in different areas. And the person who's dealing with that sort of energy in their life is sort of in this position of having to juggle all those different impulses and all the different directions they want to go in. In this case, it's four different directions you're sort of being pulled in all at
Hmm.
once. I think especially with the cardinal grand cross, because cardinal energy is all about momentum and forward movement and initiation. It is all about change and initiating change. And you add cardinality to the symbolism of the square, which is the aspect of Mars. So, more challenging and more extreme. I like that comparison of like, you know, getting a job and, sort of getting promoted, when you're at your job review and everything is just kind of going along as expected,
Hmm.
like it's sort of going along according to script. That's very much what the energy of the trine is like, or being on the so-called relationship escalator where you date and then you get engaged and then you get married and you have kids, just sort of like the traditional cultural script
Hmm.
for how a relationship is supposed to change and grow, or how the workplace is your position at your workplace is supposed to change and grow. Whereas with a square, it's like anything goes, like anything could happen at any point. You could be bouncing from one extreme to the other. um, so it's a little more chaotic.
Yeah, and it's making me think of you. Your preferred exercise routine is climbing stairs, right?
Yeah, I was climbing stairs for a while, and then I got a hold of an exercise bike. So but either way, it's this sort of like stationary, like steady, one direction at a time kind of. It's not very
Yeah.
chaotic.
Well, just it's making me think of just the square by itself, right? And just the shape of it. It's a right angle, you know. While a trine is like a nice, it makes me think of like a ramp that you kind of walk up the ramp, and you don't have to like
Oh yeah, it's like a
lift.
gentle
Yeah,
slope.
a gentle slope that you slowly climb up, and it doesn't take you don't have to expend quite as much energy, at least not at one moment, but it might take you a little longer to get to the top of it has to be a longer ramp to get to cover the same distance. While stairs, you climb up each stair, and if you've ever climbed up a bunch of stairs, that wears you out pretty fast, right? It's kind of hard on your knees, but you can also get up to higher levels faster.
Oh yeah, that's a good point where it's like the steepness. Well, I feel like that's good commentary on the nature of Capricorn, which is a cardinal sign,
Mhm.
and because Capricorn tends to be associated more with tradition and restraint, and it has this sort of holding on or blocking kind of energy. I think sometimes it's hard to understand what makes Capricorn cardinal, but it's that like you are moving, you're just moving through more difficult terrain.
Hmm.
So your movement is maybe not as quick or as obvious as it would be in a sign like Cancer or Aries, but you are nonetheless, making forward movement. You're just kind of struggling forward,
Yeah,
like climbing up very, very steep stairs.
yeah, rugged terrain. Yeah, that makes me think. Well, just to say a bit about maybe the difference between cardinal, mutable, and fixed. Just so we maybe talk a little bit about like the differences between like a cardinal grand cross and a fixed one and a mutable one. Um, is that Cardinal is all about, initiating things. It's initiating actions, the beginnings of things, starting things like starting up a company or something. Fixed signs are, I guess, status quo to a degree, but they're kind of talking about things that are already established, already happening. And
they maintain the
they
establishment.
maintain, yeah. There's more of a lasting quality to fixed signs, but they're also, not as movable. It's already happening. The momentum is already there. And mutable would be more about like the endings of things, but also it's more transitory. You think of like the seasons, Pisces, for example. It's a mutable sign. It kind of comes at the very end of winter, just before spring. So there's kind of that in between period where it's kind of winter still, but it's the snow's kind of starting to melt, sort of like preparing for spring. So like mutable signs are a bit more adaptable, but they maybe have a similar struggle as like cardinal signs is kind of maintaining direction, right? Like they're not as it's harder. Maybe a little, like mutable signs aren't as good at like staying on one task, for a long period of time.
Yeah, I think of mutable as switching back and forth, or sort
Yeah.
of being in two places at once or doing two things at
Mm-hmm.
once. The traditional term for them is double-bodied signs, and if you look at
Of two
the
natures.
symbols for the mutable signs, yeah, they're of two natures, or they're literally split in two, and you can see it with all of the symbols. Even Virgo is maybe the least obvious, but Virgo is often depicted as an angel, which is of two natures, right? Of the mind and spirit. You have a human who also has some sort of divine nature as well. And Gemini and Pisces are pretty obvious because they're both symbolized by two things. And the centaur of Sagittarius is half human, half horse. So with all four signs, you have this meeting of two natures, sort of both acting at once or alternating.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's sort of the key difference between mutable and cardinal, because both of those modalities are about change. But in the case of cardinal, it's more like, moving from one thing to the next. And with mutable, it's more about having your feet planted in two different worlds simultaneously.
Yeah.
And having to sort of be flexible because you never know what sort of demands might be placed on you by these sort of opposite expectations.
Yeah. And I guess thinking about that in the context of grand crosses, like I guess generally, I mean, a lot of the common discussion around grand crosses, and I think in practice, what I feel like I've noticed is that cardinal grand crosses are a little, I don't want to say easier, but they're a little, I think a grand cross is more compatible with the nature of cardinal signs in general.
Yeah.
Because you think of somebody like, I don't know, like constantly starting new things, like, I don't know, like getting like multiple balls rolling, and maybe always having these like different balls rolling all the time. So it makes me think of the way that anything about how like electric motors work?
I am absolutely terrible at anything mechanical. I do not
Yeah.
understand it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, I only know the essence of it. I'm not mechanical in any way. Um, yeah. So essentially, the way a motor works is, when electric current passes through a coil in a magnetic field, the magnetic force produces like torque, which turns the motor. And then there's like a kind of communicator that like reverses the current each half revolution to like keep the torque turning. The same coil, like in the same direction. So like, creates this very, active movement. And while it's only, dealing with two poles, like a good, well-oiled Grand Cross makes me think of that, of like how an electric motor works. It's a lot of dynamic energy that when, going smoothly can generate a lot of power, generate a lot of uh, dynamic action. It can be like very constructive.
It can, but I can imagine it, can also get very tiring because that motor does not shut off in the case of
Yeah.
a cardinal Grand Cross. It's
Oh
just
yeah,
always
yeah.
going.
Yeah.
Although, the nature of the planets involved can change that with Jet's cardinal Grand Cross in particular. The four planets involved are Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and the Moon. And we've got Jet's chart up in the show notes. So if you want to take a look at it and follow along, please do so. So Jet was born with Libra rising, and Jupiter is in Libra as well in the first house. So um, if you've been listening carefully, you may already realize that this particular cardinal Grand Cross is taking place in the angular houses in Jet's chart because cardinal planet number one is Jupiter in Libra right there in the first house. And then we have the moon in Capricorn in the fourth house, forming another point of the Grand Cross. And then in the seventh house, we have Venus in Aries. And finally, in the 10th house, we have Mars in Cancer. And that completes our Grand Cross of cardinal planets. So, something I find kind of interesting about this one is that you have some like pretty soft and gentle planets making up, um, the three points at the bottom of the Grand Cross, at least, visually in this chart, they're at the bottom there. Um, and although, like, the moon in Capricorn and Venus in Aries are maybe not as traditionally soft and fluffy as the moon and Venus are as sort of like pure archetypes of themselves. Um, it's, despite being like, them all squaring and opposing each other, those are they're generally pretty gentle natured planets. And when you have a square from a benefic planet like Jupiter or Venus, it's actually really supportive. And if the benefic is earlier in the order of zodiacal signs and it's squaring another planet, it's actually bonifying that planet. So it's giving it so much support that ancient astrologers were just like, this is one of the best things that you can possibly have in a chart. So even though it's still a tense aspect when you have the benefics involved, um, it's a little bit less like somebody trying to fight you and a little bit more like, maybe an accountability buddy who, they do light a little bit of a fire under your butt to get moving, but in a very supportive, friendly, gentle sort of way, and they're providing resources and, maybe wisdom and advice. Like in the case of Jupiter and Libra squaring the moon in Capricorn, Jupiter is, bonifying the moon. So, that's sort of like Jupiter maybe acting as a mentor or, giving the moon some good advice or giving the moon like connections or, literal resources that help the moon do what it wants to do. So it's still, a little bit more active than if that was a trine, but it's nonetheless like, not traditionally a difficult aspect despite being a square. But then when you get to the top of the Grand Cross, you have Mars, and I feel like Mars is really the one that's kind of moving all of this and like injecting a little bit of like fire and sharpness into this overall Grand Cross and sort of stirring the pot.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Well, I mean, squares are the nature of Mars, right? But squares with like benefics, or softer planets, I think like the essential energy of a square is just it's excessive to some degree, or just like a lot. So, that could look like more, you know, just thinking of like the mentor um analogy, like you have your mentor that's like, way to go, like, you're on the right track. Maybe touch up this here and there. Uh, keep putting your work in, and like, you're on your way to, that fantastic essay that you've been wanting to write. Um, while like, with the square, like Jupiter squaring the moon, right? Look a little more like more energetic, enthusiastic uh praise or enthusiasm. Um, you want to like push forward faster. It can be a little excessive though, like maybe unrealistic expectations that are overall positive, like pushing you forward in a positive direction. Um,
Creates sort of a high standard to live up to.
yeah,
There's like a real sense of ambition.
yeah. When I think like Moon Jupiter, I always just feel like optimism, right? It adds a lot of optimism to the moon, right? To maybe your emotional state to some degree. And in like a smoother aspect, it's a little more realistic optimism, but in like a harder aspect, it might be a little more excessive, that could be,
Yeah.
met with disappointment here and there too. Yeah, I guess, the hard aspects being of the nature of both malefics and malefics dealing with extremes. I do like to think of excess with hard aspects, which can be nice. If it's like Jupiter square Venus, having excess um, money or friends is great, but it can also, you could party too much as well.
I think some of the potential difficulties with the nature of a cardinal grand cross are a risk of burnout. Trying to take on too much, trying to do too much, trying to do too much at once, not giving yourself enough of a break between projects, or feeling pulled in. In this case, um, you're literally being pulled in four directions at once. That's sort of the visually, that's what the Grand Cross is, like your life sort of being pulled with the same amount of like intensity and ambition, but in four different directions all at the same
Hmm.
time. Which, some people can certainly pull off, but um, there's a point at which you need to stop and rest, because there is only so much that any one of us is capable of. And this one in particular, taking place in the angular houses is really interesting, because you have a planet in the first house, which has to do with the self, and, having a strong sense of individual identity, and the fourth house, which has to do with home and family, and the seventh house that has to do with relationships, and the 10th house that has to do with your career and your, interface with the world and your public life, which are all sort of, they're the angular houses because those are the four sort of most pivotal and usually significant areas of life for all of us that are pretty universal, right? Um, that is where we encounter things that profoundly change us and that move our story forward significantly. Um, so there can be, perhaps a sense of competing ambitions, where it's like, I want to be the best me I can possibly be, is what Jupiter in the first house is saying. And, the moon in the fourth house is saying, like, I want to be, the best family member ever. And I want to have, a really fulfilling private life and have like a lovely home. I want it to be like clean and organized, and, all of the sorts of ambitions you could have related to home and family. And then, Venus in the seventh house is like, I want to have really great relationships and, be an expert on, interpersonal interaction. And then Mars in the 10th is like, I want to be, I want a legacy, I want to make a name for myself in the world, and have, pursue a career that gives me a sense of purpose. And trying to have all four of those things sort of like maxed out, you're sort of like min-maxing
Yeah.
in a video game, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a lot. Like it's certainly a worthwhile ambition to have, but, there's this sense of like wanting to be the best and achieve as much as possible in like all of the really significant areas of life all at once.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I like the maxing out your video game character analogy. It's like usually most games, like there's like you get so many whatever XP points that you can put towards different um upgrading different skills, so you're not going to get like a character with 100 points in all the different categories, usually um emphasizing like agility is going to come at the expense of something else. If you want to be agile, maybe you can't be as strong or something. So yeah, I think a Gradinal, a Cardinal
A
Grand Cross,
Grandinal.
or just a Grand Cross in general. Yeah, it's gonna kind of look like that, like wanting to put so much energy in so many different things, but um, there's a maximum limit, human wise and time wise, to how much you can accomplish in each area. Like you kind of have to focus it a bit to get results. It's going to look like starting a lot of things and maybe not finishing them in theory.
Yeah, there's so I don't have a Grand Cross in my chart, but I do have an extremely cardinal chart. It's like 95% cardinal. It's ridiculous how cardinal my chart is. When I was first doing astrology classes, my astrology teacher put all of our charts up on the wall, and mine was the one chart that would not stay stuck to the wall.
Yeah.
It just kept the tape kept peeling away from the wall, and it kept falling down, and we would just joke that like it was too cardinal to stay in one place for that long.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember as a kid reading some sort of children's novel. I don't remember the book. I don't remember what it was about, but I have a vivid memory of this one scene in the book where a character got into an apple harvest, I think, and just took a single bite out of every single one of the
Oh,
apples.
I like that. Yeah.
And like, when their parent or caregiver, whoever it was, saw what happened, they were just like, I mean, the apple harvest was ruined. But like, instead of getting, angry and upset, they were like, why did you do this? And the kid was like, because the first bite tastes the best. That's the best one. And
Yeah.
I've never related to anything so hard in my entire life. Like I've forgotten the context that the story was in, but I was just like, yeah, it's true. The first bite is the best. And I think cardinal energy can be a bit like that, like taking one bite out of 1,000 apples.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that's a great analogy. Say, I have a very fixed chart. Actually, I think like what 6 of my planets are involved in a T square, which is not quite the same as a Grand Cross, but similar. And yeah, I do. I have a similar tendency to want to put a lot of energy in a lot of different things, but I do have a little bit harder of a time with initiating things. I kind of want to skip to the middle part, like to where everything's just running smoothly. I want to get to that part. And there's kind of the frustration with like a more of a fixed. Could apply that to like a Grand Cross, like a fixed Grand Cross would be harder to get moving. Be like a lot more stuck sort of energy. Maybe a lot of I just want to say like a catch-22.
Well, I do. I like that description of just wanting to get to the middle part, just wanting. It's funny because I
don't like to eat the crust. I want all the stuff in the middle. No.
Yeah, you want the middle of the Oreo.
The juicy middle part, yeah. I want to dig a little bit more focus a little bit on Jet's Grand Cross.
Because there is no Saturn in this Grand Cross, so it's really the wheel is just turning. There's kind of nobody has their foot on the brake in this particular Grand Cross.
Yeah, they're all planets that are down to move.
Yeah,
the moon's very fast moving. Venus, benefics. I mean, I guess Jupiter its domiciles are mutable, but has an exaltation in a cardinal sign. Venus has a domicile in a cardinal sign. The moon, its domicile is cardinal. Mars likes cardinal. They're they're down to move. So I would think a lot of restless movement, but I would think that like when there's a lot of reception involved, I think that you get a little bit more of the electric motor running, as opposed to a bunch of parts that like don't really fit together, like finding a way to harmonize them or to combine things is going to be easier, I think, when there's reception, and there's quite a bit in this one. So you got
there's a lot of reception going on. There are a lot of, like, there's some potential disagreements, but there's a lot of sympathy going on as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think like Venus is in Aries, and it's in the overcoming square with Mars, and Mars rules Aries. So, I mean, there is sort of an exchange. Think of like a trade relationship or something between countries, like where, I have something you want and you have something I want. So we don't need to fight each other. It's actually more profitable for us not to fight and do business.
Yeah, and the Venus being in the 7th house, representing relationships and partnerships, but also being in Aries, which is the sign of Venus's detriment, which could indicate relationships that are a little more unconventional or that go against the grain in some way. But nonetheless, those relationships are supporting what Mars is trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, this can be, you want to have the greatest relationships and also have the greatest career, but those two areas of life are actually potentially really working together well.
Yeah.
And both of the planets are in kind of unconventional signs. So, if it's a relationship that's, a little Venus and Aries-y, a little bit a relationship that kind of goes off script or sort of defies norms or expectations in some way. Mars in Cancer is also a Mars that, defies expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So, they've kind of got each other's back in that sense. And, because Venus is in the domicile of Mars and is in, the overcoming position, it's sort of like, Venus is being treated as a guest of Mars, but also has, a certain amount of power in that situation. Because Venus is earlier in zodiacal order, Venus is able to make demands of their host.
Yeah.
So, I would think that's actually like, it's dynamic, and, potentially challenging in that, what you might want to do in those two areas of life, you may have to do some of those, achieve some of those goals in a way that is defiant of, what is expected of you. But nonetheless, those two areas of life are supporting one another.
Yeah.
It's not a contest. It's not like, it's sometimes with grand crosses, it can be like one area of life implicated in the Grand Cross needs to be sacrificed for another, or like how do you compromise between these four competing interests, and there's one that's sort of asking the other to make a sacrifice, like you need to spend less time on your relationships if you want to pursue a graduate degree or whatever it is, or those two areas of your life are demanding that one of them needs to be sacrificed for the other. In this section of the Grand Cross, it doesn't look like that kind of situation. It doesn't look like relationships or career need to be sacrificed for the other.
No, not that it's necessarily how it's played out or even played out yet, but it makes me think of like a power couple, like a very eccentric power couple.
Eccentric power couple. I like that.
Mm-hmm. It's like they don't have to exist as two separate spheres of life. Like there's ways that they can merge. To some degree and support each other, which there's lots of ways I can think of that would play out more favorably. But similarly too, like with the Venus is opposing Jupiter in the first, and Venus rules Jupiter. Like there's reception there. Not that we would be too worried about a Venus Jupiter opposition. If anything, I would think I don't
I
know,
think that
probably
would
fun to
be
party with.
stabilizing. Yeah,
Yeah,
also that.
yeah, that's uh, lively and energetic and enthusiastic. Um,
Yeah, it's when I think of like Venus and Jupiter and hard aspect to each other, I think more of like two friends who really love each other, like shouting over top of other voices and music at a bar so they can hear each other, or it's
mhm.
just like that kind of exuberant
Like
energy.
pushing each other to yeah to more and more
Yeah,
fun.
pushing each other to succeed a little.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, I like. And Jupiter's also in a position where it can bonify the moon. It's in the overcoming square with the moon in Capricorn in the fourth, which I think helps. The fact that like Mars is being bonified by Venus and the moon is being bonified by Jupiter, and it helps with that opposition, the moon and Mars. But there is some reception there as well. 'Cause, Mars exalts in Capricorn and the moon rules Cancer. Call that like a mixed reception. Not that that's gonna, make that the easiest aspect in the world by any means, but it's gonna help a lot. It describes like a like difficulty, but it's sort of because they are to some degree responsible to each other, Mars and the
Hmm.
moon. Uh, there it sort of points to a path to like integrating the two, to making them more cooperative or making more maybe more obvious, not obvious, but more accessible solutions to the problems that opposition describes.
Yeah, and looking into that opposition with more detail, we've got the moon in the fourth house and Mars in the 10th. And
Hmm.
the moon is generally about relaxation and how we get comfortable,
Hmm.
how we take care of ourselves. The moon is a cozy sort of energy, and um, has to do with like we're doing the moon when we are unwinding. We're doing the moon when we're nourishing ourselves. When we're taking a nice bubble bath and having a snack. Like that's a lunar activity.
Typically not when we're
Um,
Marsing.
Not
we're
when we're
doing Mars.
Marsing,
Yeah.
we're out trying to take over the world. So,
Hmm.
those two planets are generally at odds with each other, which is also why, they don't tend to be super comfortable in each other's signs.
Hmm.
So with, the Mars opposition, um, one way that can manifest is difficulty relaxing because the moon is how we get
Hmm.
comfortable, and Mars is like there's always a crisis, there's always an emergency as far as Mars is concerned, and there's always something else to do, and you need to always be vigilant and ready to act quickly.
Yeah.
And the poor moon is like, I'm just trying to have a cup of tea and read my book, and Mars
Hmm.
is like, but at any moment an alarm bell could go off and you need to be ready.
Yeah.
um, so there's and because of the houses they're in, that kind of fits in with the symbolism well too, since the moon is in the fourth house, which is about home and private life. So like the moon here is really just like, I just want to go, into my private space and, not be seen by anybody and
Hmm.
just relax. And Mars is up there like um wanting to be seen in this very public place, being very ambitious, being like,
Hmm.
we've got, we don't have time for this. We've got to keep working and working and working in order to, achieve these ambitions. So it could, potentially be a very restless energy that, could be liable to burnout.
Yeah.
But because the moon is in Mars's sign of exaltation, and Mars is in the moon's domicile, they do have a little more sympathy for each other,
Hmm.
and they're able to kind of exchange resources a little bit, which I think takes the edge off of that combination.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a good deal, the edge. And like, you know, you can work from home, right? I mean, there's ways to
Yeah,
merge the fourth and 10th houses.
yeah.
It's not like an impossible thing. And having, reception between the planets ruling those houses or planets in those houses, like, is going to, like create like avenues, sort of outlets. So I mean, it's, and I don't want to say like, oh, it's going to be easy to sit back and relax and have your tea. Um, but it may be like, I don't know, to some degree, it's I don't know, it makes me think of like a shark, how sharks can never stop swimming.
Right? They can't just
Yeah,
lay still. They got to keep moving.
while they swim, while they sleep, yeah, they drown if they don't.
That's a really good image.
So I mean, there's a way that like that movement, that constant like energy and restlessness, it probably feels best, when you're actually moving and acting on things, which can be very productive. But then, yeah, like you said, Tristan, the burnout. So, you know, I mean, it seems like, I don't know, a cycle that could work pretty well of, working hard and playing hard, or going on a nice vacation after, a long stint of workaholism or something.
Well, yeah, it's that the sort of extreme nature of these aspects, and also just the extreme nature of literally anything that involves
Yeah.
Mars. I think about, well, even like what my partner does, who has a very malefic chart,
Mhm.
um, and his work is very seasonal. So he works insanely hard, like 10-hour days doing like really demanding physical labor and a ton of commuting. Like he travels for hours every day. And then, he has a whole bunch of projects at home, some of which are also connected to career. And so, he'll come home after a 10-hour shift and, work for 3 more
Mhm.
hours. And that's just, how he is. But then, because of the nature of his work, he also gets most of the winter off. So it's that going from one extreme to the next, like you work yourself, like a horse, and then you take, a lot more time off at once compared to other people. I mean, I don't know. I a lot about teaching, but I feel like teaching can probably be one of those jobs too, where it's just like really demanding and really intense when you're at work, and then you get the summer off, and
Yeah.
so you're sort of bouncing between those two extremes all the time.
Yeah, and I mean that I think the key is finding balance in that, and that could look very differently. That may not be like a daily sort of balance, that may be like a broader scale, like a seasonal sort of balance. But I mean, I think maybe the obvious problem to me is just the burnout, but just, yeah, like even noticing when you're burning out, and maybe not until it's too late. And maybe having to do that a couple times before you maybe get the message of like, oh, this is what happens when I'm burning out, or when I'm not taking care of myself, working too much.
Yeah, I think that's the case with sort of more extreme types of energy, is that you don't always, when you're in the thick of it, you're just sort of intoxicated by that, needing to keep moving forward. And you don't actually know where the limits are until you reach them
Mm-hmm.
and you hit that wall. I think that can be, one of the characteristics of squares and oppositions, is you kind of do have to go too far a couple of
Yeah.
times in order to know where too far is, and then you're like, okay, I understand how to work with this
Mm-hmm.
now. But you kind of have to learn the lesson the hard way a
Oh
couple of
yeah.
times.
Well, I mean, speaking from experience, and to some degree, it's again, T square's not quite the same, but you get some similar manifestations. I don't know,
Yeah.
almost like it's like those hard aspects make things more cardinal like. And I think maybe with a fixed grand cross or T square aspect pattern like that, it's learning to be more fixed. I don't know, learning to take a slower, steadier pace. 'Cause I know once I start doing something I'm into, I want to do it for the next 20 hours if I can. But obviously that can be very destabilizing. So
And I think maybe one of the sort of key differences between a cardinal or mutable grand cross and a fixed one is that you potentially have these competing interests.
mhm.
And in the case of cardinal, you're all going to try to like start at once and sort of yell over top of each other, and with mutable, you're going to try to juggle everything at once.
Mhm.
And with fixed, it's like everybody, you don't get started at all because everyone is disagreeing about
Yeah.
what to do. So you're kind of stuck in that
Mhm.
stage of like, okay, well, who's going to win? Um, and they can't decide like what direction do we go in first, because they all want to go into 4 different places. But
Yeah.
when I think of like the cardinal version, it reminds me a little bit more of the picture on the Two of Pentacles in a Rider Waite deck, where there's this like swirling sea with all the waves behind the figure, and the boats are kind of being tossed on the sea,
Yeah.
and the figure is juggling, the two pentacles and like dancing at the same time, where it's just like, I'm doing everything at once. And meanwhile, his fixed sign buddy is just like, I haven't even started yet.
Yeah. I don't know which one I want to juggle right now. I
Yeah,
don't
it's
want
like
to
I'm
juggle.
I'm
I want to
sitting,
hold this one for a long time and then
yeah.
maybe address the other one later on when I'm in the mood
Yeah,
to.
it's maybe a bit more of a Four of Pentacles energy, where the figure is just like sitting there hunched over, like hanging on to all the pentacles. Like, I could do something with each of these four pentacles, but I don't really know what to do first. So I'm just going to hold them. And meanwhile, the Cardinal one is just like, I'm going to use all four coins at once and just hope for the best.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like traditionally, like, a lot of like the interpretive principles of astrology, it all kind of comes down to affinity between planets and what situation they're in. So I do find that, a grand cross it has more affinity to cardinal signs and even like angular houses as well.
Yeah, where they're action oriented houses, they're change oriented
Yeah.
houses, they're focused on movement. And they're the peak, right? Like,
Hmm.
they're the culmination point. So there's that sense of like elevated, the things that are in them are elevated, and there's also just like an intense concentration of like focused energy.
Yeah. Sounds like a busy life, Jet.
It does sound like a busy life. I do want to say that I know Jet personally, and she is just like an incredibly wise and supportive and generous and kind person. So if any listeners are looking at her chart and they're curious to know what the chart of a incredibly decent human being looks like, you are looking at it. This is just the chart of a
Well,
very,
Jupiter in the first house.
yeah,
Yeah.
Jupiter in the first. There you go. Just like friendly and generous and supportive. That's the Jupiter is that like, you know, person you look up to who's like always there for you kind of energy.
Mm. Yeah, it's I like this chart overall. I think it's fun.
It's a very fun
Granted,
chart.
yeah,
Yeah, it's just like almost all the planets are in places they're not supposed to be. They're like five of the seven traditional planets are either in detriment or fall, and they're just
Mhm.
like, we're just gonna make the most of this somehow.
I think all my like UFC research has really got me rethinking how important dignity really is. I don't know. I don't know if like a planet has to be in a good sign to function well. Um, I think even like a lot of traditional thinking is more focused on house placement and angularity and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, they definitely come with challenges. But um, said it before, say it again. That I think there's a lot of room in the world now for people acting um, in non-traditional ways or
Well, maybe
going against the
that's,
grain a little bit.
yeah, maybe that's, I mean, the world is still a pretty difficult place, but, if you think about,
Yeah.
like where I'm sitting in Canada in the 21st century compared to, somebody living 1,000 years ago, um, it's the sort of extreme interpretations of planets in different sorts of dignity in traditional astrology maybe make more sense in a society where it's like most people are they most people in that society don't have any power whatsoever,
Yeah.
and are just kind of at the whim of the system in a really sort of extreme way. um Whereas like I'm somebody who doesn't have a lot of um sort of power and influence or whatever, but like there's um more sort of room for me in the world than there would have been, 1,000 years ago.
Well, maybe like not at the world in the world at large, but like within your your community, within your communities you're involved in.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But yeah, I guess it's like there are spaces for me, even though um
Yeah.
in a lot of ways I am unconventional, and sort of, the usual scripts don't tend to include me, there are at least still spaces for me where I can, have influence and like have community and express myself. And, there are more opportunities for me to make creative use of sort of the unusual circumstances I've been dealt. Whereas, in other times in human history, that would not have been the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, it's like want to qualify everything that I say, but I mean, the world now is not, all roses and, cherry orchards and stuff. But things have improved, I guess, a lot for people who are operating outside of convention, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't make it easy. It just means that there are communities where your voice can be heard. It tends to be what I think about, like with dignity a lot, is the ruling planet being kind of the expectation that the planet is being held to some degree, whether internally or externally.
I think a conversation about dignity might be a good segue into our next question.
Yeah.
Our second question comes from Karoliina, or is it Karoliina? I'm realizing I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm very sorry.
Karoliina, I would think. Karoliina seems
how to pronounce? Yeah, let's go with that. And I apologize if that is incorrect. So Karoliina wants to know if she is doomed with so many fallen or debilitated planets and squares in her chart. She also wants to know how one should react to challenging aspects like squares and oppositions or difficult dignities, and also how this relates to one's karma.
Good question.
And I've got Karoliina's chart is in the show notes if anyone wants to follow along with our interpretation and everything.
Well, start off. The answer is no. And next question.
The answer is you are most certainly not doomed. I think I can speak for both Kyle and I in saying that we do not belong to a school of thought that one's birth chart dictates their destiny. Or that, traditionally difficult placements in a birth chart indicate any sort of doom and gloom. They can manifest in all kinds of ways, and sometimes they just manifest in really quirky, weird ways that, are not necessarily, evil or, anything sort of scary like that.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, sometimes they do describe difficult situations or experiences, but, we also have a lot of agency in how we respond to that. And I guess my thoughts get drawn to the second part of the question, which is like how to respond to difficult placements in the chart when you see them. And that's mainly, I mean, I guess it's good to get a sense of like what the traditional interpretations are, what, maybe two astrologers have to say about it. But I find it personally like valuable to, if they are difficult placements, like how they might have already played out in your life. It can often indicate just stuff that maybe already happened, or maybe not even stuff that happened, just the way you feel about certain things. And sort of like a degree of maybe even like accepting that, like, okay, that happened, this or that happened. But in many cases, you might already be doing things that like manage that, or you may already be working with that in a much more constructive way. Like, I don't know, for myself, seeing some of my more difficult placements and accepting the negative ways that maybe they have played out, sort of like ended up being like constructive in the sense of like, okay, I see, that happened. All right. I can't change, what's already happened, but I can maybe change, or maybe already have changed in many ways, how I react to it, or how I, I'm already or can in the future work with that in like a more constructive way or a more positive way. And often even just like a difficult placement can describe a lot of different things, and not all of them are difficult, you know?
Yeah, and some things that are challenging or difficult are enjoyable, depending on your temperament.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
looking at Carolina's chart here, I see that the sun is in Aries, so, and Mars is conjunct the ascendant in the first house, and those are indications of being someone who doesn't necessarily shy away from challenge. So,
Yeah.
not everybody um wants the kind of life where everything just goes smoothly and they're never challenged. Like that's very boring.
Hmm.
Sometimes being unsatisfied in a subject of study or at a job or in a relationship can be because it's too boring. There's nothing about it that kind of forces you to change or grow in any way.
Hmm.
And people have different temperaments where that is concerned. Some people would prefer life to be a little bit of an adventure. And so, difficult or challenging situations, depending on the kind of situations you're talking about and what sort of temperament you have, are not necessarily bad. Um, I also think because Carolina mentioned as well, starting to study a little bit more Hellenistic astrology. And one thing that Chris Brennan, who I learned Hellenistic astrology from, says quite a lot. I think, he repeats on the astrology podcast fairly often, and I'm glad he repeats it, is, the delineations that you read in traditional texts for placements are going to be very extreme because
Hmm.
when you're trying to teach somebody the nature of these symbols, it's more extreme situations are more memorable, and
Hmm.
tell you more about sort of like what are these symbols about and where are their limits. For most people, that placement is not going to manifest as the worst case scenario.
Hmm.
But the best case scenario or the worst case scenario, those are really valuable teaching tools. It's like, using case studies, right? Like using remarkable case studies um, to learn about people or situations. Those case studies don't necessarily generalize well to the whole population,
Hmm.
but nonetheless they do still teach you a lot about certain things by showing you really unusual or extreme circumstances. And
Yeah.
I think that's something to keep in mind when you're reading those traditional interpretations, is that of course they're extreme because that's what you're going to remember and that's what's going to help you learn, but most of the time that's not actually realistically what goes on in the average person's life.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, Actually, do you mind if I just describe the chart a little bit for listeners,
Yeah, yeah, go
just to
for it.
get a sense of what's going on? 'Cause it's actually funny that Carolina and Jet were born within 2 months of each other. They'd be within, yeah, within 2 months of each other. Actually, very similar charts, and there's a similar grand cross going on um, in Carolina's chart. So
In the angular houses and
in the
cardinal
angular
signs, no
houses,
less.
yeah. So you guys should be
We have a
friends.
theme. Yes, become friends.
Well, so Carolina was born with Cancer rising, with Mars conjunct the ascendant, about 20 degrees in Cancer, and the Sun in Aries in the 10th house, and the Moon in Libra in the 4th house. Jupiter is also in the 4th house in Libra. Venus is in Aries in Libra, and
Sorry, wait, Venus is in.
then Venus is in Aries in Libra. Venus
Venus is
is
in
in
Aries in the 10th house.
Aries in the 10th house. Yes. And Mars is opposing Neptune and Uranus in Capricorn in the 7th. Mercury is in Pisces in the 9th house, and Saturn is in Aquarius in the 8th house. So happy Saturn return, Carolina.
Oh, yeah. Happy Saturn return. Jet and Karoliina. This is very
Yeah.
exciting.
But yeah, just getting the basis of the chart. So kind of similar themes going on, but kind of going back to what you were saying about getting into Hellenistic astrology is like, yeah, the initial reaction to like the interpretations and everything, they are very extreme. But I guess also thing to keep in mind, the deeper you get into it, there's like a lot of other factors always at play to consider as well.
And there are a lot of mitigating factors in this chart as
Mm-hmm.
well, even though, you do have a bunch of planets that are not traditionally dignified, like Mercury is in Pisces, Venus is in Aries, Mars is in Cancer, right on the ascendant. So those three planets, all stand out as being, in signs that are a little awkward for them. And also, being pretty visible. Venus is up in the 10th and Mars is extremely angular right on the ascendant. So,
Mm-hmm.
they're very prominent planets in the chart as well.
Yeah. Well, I know. I guess the first thing, whenever you see a planet like right on the ascendant, your eye kind of immediately gets drawn to that. And first thing I thought, even just seeing that, was familiar with like Michael Phelps. It's a Olympic. I don't know if he does it professionally anymore, but he was a big Olympic swimmer. Um, Mars and Cancer swimming, like actually would say, is great remediation for Mars and Cancer if you ever want to take up swimming, or maybe you do already. But Michael Phelps actually did an interesting documentary not that long ago about. It's been a while since I watched it, but it was about like the unhealthy patterns that athletes get into, like the obsession to win, and particularly like I think it was about Olympic athletes and how they would spend 4 years training for the Olympics, and then whether they won or not, at the end of the day, after that, they almost, I don't want to say universally, but a majority of them fell into like huge, deep depressions, and it's kind of like a huge come down, and then having to figure out like what to do with your life after that. But I just thought that was like an interesting manifestation of that for like a fallen Mars in the first house for like an athlete who ends up succeeding quite prominently as an athlete, champion swimmer, but then kind of challenging the culture around athleticism, and even kind of like exploring the drawbacks and dark side of the way that athletes themselves approach athletics and the way what we expect from athletes.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think, looking at planets in fall, there is that symbolism of sort of falling from a high place or a high point.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes you have to start out or get to the high place first in order to have that experience of falling. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
you and I have discussed this more and more recently, how exaltation and fall really, it is an axis. And I think when you have a planet either an exaltation or fall in your chart anywhere, it draws attention not only to that planet, but to the whole axis it's on and just to the whole nature of what is it to be sort of elevated and what is it to be brought low. And
Yeah.
that experience or sort of a deeper understanding of that dynamic and how it plays out in human culture, I think is part of that. It doesn't mean that like, if a planet is in fall, that it's always, as somewhere, in the ditch, like it's a planet that maybe through its experiences has a recognition of the extremes between, being high up
Mm-hmm.
on a throne versus being in the ditch. And, somebody like a professional athlete, is a good example of that, where being a professional athlete sort of forces you um, to extremes in your pursuit of your goal. And yet your goals are necessarily limited by human physiology. And at some point, you're not going to be able to compete at that level anymore. And you're going to have to come to terms with that and find a way um, to, build your identity around a new way of living. If your whole identity was kind of built around being the best athlete in the world, that's not sustainable. So how do you still have like a positive self-concept when you're no longer able to compete at the level you once were?
Yeah. We have been talking a lot about that lately, and since the last episode, my Mars research on the UFC fighters got like way deeper. Um, but this is making me think about that. I'm still working on writing the article, I can barely talk, so imagine how long it takes me to write things. Um, but Mars and Cancer and Mars and Capricorn were like the two most common Mars signs of the UFC fighters. I think Mars and Cancer did end up. I think it was second. I think there was one less Mars and Cancer than one Mars and Capricorn. But yeah, very much highlights that axis, the fall exaltation axis. And I think that like planets in fall and planets in exaltation can kind of both end up in the same places. Either starting from a high place and going to a low place, or going to a low place from a high place, or back and forth in between, or just understanding all the dynamics of that, So, I mean, I wouldn't get too down on falls. That's why it's taking me so long to write, because I feel like I grok something internally about falls that I want to express, but it's really hard to express or put in a way that I want to. But, you're in good company. I'm a, Cancer rising, and my first house is ruled by a fallen moon in Scorpio, right? So, I actually had similar reactions, maybe to you, when I started getting into Hellenistic astrology. I had that very same question of, am I doomed, because of this fallen planet? But just from talking to clients and talking to people about their charts and getting deeper into astrology, yeah, very definitively, no.
Yeah, I think planets in fall can be also about, climbing your way out of a fallen place. It can be, starting in a place, which, I mean, I relate to that kind of narrative as somebody who also has the moon in Scorpio ruling my ascendant with a day chart. So we both got an out of sect fallen planet ruling our ascendants.
I'm fascinated by like Mars and Cancer, because it's like the complementary other half or whatever.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with Mars and Cancers. It's like our mutual reception.
Mm-hmm. I know a ton of them, a bunch of my family. And yeah, I mean, I think that the finding your way out of a difficult situation, or but also with like fallen planets, is that I was at an improv show not that long ago, and it occurred to me that who tends to get into something like improv? It's usually people who are naturally inclined towards comedy or being on a stage or something like improv. But often, a lot, my partner was taking improv classes, a lot of them are people who actually really, really struggle in those areas. And they take those classes to get better at socializing and feeling more comfortable in their own skin, or just saying what's on their mind. And often it's those people who kind of have to build, say, planetary nature of some kind, but kind of like starting from the bottom and having to work, like build your way up in a position to know more about every detail of how to moon, and maybe in our case, or how to Mars, in your case.
Yeah,
or how to Mercury.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. It's making me think of when I was younger, I briefly took singing lessons, and, I was really hesitant to do it at first because I'm not a good singer. And, but people around me were making the point that, well, that's what singing lessons are for. Like, you don't start out good. Like, people who just start out with a natural talent for singing don't, necessarily need singing lessons. It's, those of us who don't have an innate talent for us, we're kind of starting from the bottom and working our way up. And life requires us to challenge ourselves in these ways. We're not, none of us are sort of like immortal gods who are just naturally gifted with every possible thing we could want or need to do under the sun. Like, at some point, all of us in life are going to come up against a thing that we might innately struggle with, and we've got to go to our singing lessons in order to master that thing. And it doesn't mean that you can't master that thing. You still can. You just have to go through the process of kind of learning from the ground up in order to master it.
Well, I think that's the thing with like a fall or a detriment is that because, you know, you experience like the difficulty of that or like the challenge of that planet, your attention is immediately drawn toward like, okay, how do I get better at this? You know?
Yeah.
And often result in people being excessively good at something, though they maybe have a hard time recognizing it. They can get that with exaltations too, where the standard is
Hmm.
so set so high, you know, internally that they become like disillusioned.
Yeah, as someone with two exalted planets in my chart, one of which, as I mentioned, is the Sun in Aries, like you, Karoliina. I often find, that manifests a little bit more as perfectionism in a way, because it's like
Mm-hmm.
the standard I've set for myself in that area of life is the best. I cannot do less than the
Yeah,
best, which is totally unrealistic,
you can
right?
have all the exalted planets in the world, and you're still not going to achieve perfection.
No, no, nobody's going to, even if, every planet is exalted in their chart. And everyone with exalted planets, I think,
Ugh.
still has to
I would
confront
hate
that.
hanging out with that person.
I know. That's the thing. Like,
If
I
they
think,
were perfect, if they did accomplish it, I don't know.
yeah,
That'd
you
be
wouldn't be able
really
to
lame.
relate. Yeah, you wouldn't be able to
So
relate to
full of
them.
themselves.
So, no one wants people want to be around fallen and debilitated planets because they can
Yeah.
relate, It's like
Hmm.
when I hear, the interpretations of a planet and its fall or detriment, I'm like, I sympathize with this protagonist, and when I'm
Yeah.
reading a client chart and their ascendant ruler is like a debilitated planet in some way, I'm just like, this is the hero I root for in a story.
Hmm.
I'm invested in the outcome of this protagonist story. And,
Yeah.
there's an arc to every story too, right? So if, you're starting from that fallen or exiled position, in a narrative format, your arc is going to take you away from that position because you always end up somewhere different than where you started.
Yeah.
I think Mercury in Pisces really interests me because I think it's a really good, from my personal experience, is a really good example of what you were just talking about, Kyle, with the way that debilitated planets tend to draw a lot of attention and a lot of energy because they're
Hmm.
noticeable, right? Like they stand
Oh
out.
yeah.
And so they demand a lot of energy and care. And Mercury in Pisces is a Mercury that I meet a lot, both when I look up charts of, public figures I'm interested in and in my personal life and the people I encounter. And I have yet to meet encounter a Mercury in Pisces person who's like the traditional, just like, tripping all over their words and just like can't Mercury. Like most of the
Yeah.
Mercury in Pisces um, people I've encountered are very eloquent and often very talented writers and very creative thinkers and very good speakers. And, often there is like a part of their story where, they felt discouraged at some point, or, the way they learn or think is somehow different or like unconventional or unusual. And so there were certain obstacles that they encountered because of the ways in which their thinking or speaking or learning style were unusual. But it's like so many of the best writers and public speakers have Mercury and Pisces. It's just like all that attention and work being poured into a particular area of life does potentially lead to mastery, even if it's challenging on the way.
Hmm.
I could think of somebody I know with Mercury and Pisces, um, who often feels like they're not a great speaker. Like that's sort of their subjective experience that they're like, I don't really feel like I communicate well, but to everyone else around them, it's like you're one of the best communicators I know. So
Yeah.
that can be another manifestation of these placements too, where it's like you're not actually bad at something, but maybe you're holding yourself to an unrealistic standard, or you had an
Hmm.
experience in your life which may be totally real and valid that made you feel inadequate, even though you're not actually. But maybe somebody said the wrong thing, or you were in a context where the way that you happen to think was just not the mainstream, and so you've developed this sort of belief about yourself that you're inadequate, even though
Yeah.
it's not true.
That's a great point because the more I talk to people about their charts, that ends up being It's maybe your experience of that planet that is maybe informed by what could have been just like a one-time incident,
Hmm.
maybe early on when it was very formative, that, times it's like Mercury and Pisces, felt like you weren't heard or weren't listened to, or people didn't want to pay attention to you, or um, that you just weren't good at talking, or maybe you did struggle with speaking in some way. Like you're saying, you're going to want to put a lot of energy in finding a way to either improve that or find an alternative way of expressing it. A lot of writers, maybe they struggle with interpersonal talking or interpersonal communication sometimes, and so they maybe go to writing where they can like take their time to craft their sentences in a way that they can't, when they're in the moment, speaking to somebody in front of them. So just a difficultly placed planet. It's like having to master a dichotomy of some kind, or find a way to integrate, two seemingly disparate principles, find a solution to something. And I think that is what, ends up resulting a lot. It's like creative solutions.
Oh yeah, like creativity is my number one keyword for planets in fall and detriment. And the more of them you have, the greater the creative potential in the chart, because, creativity comes from, having to come up with novel solutions to problems.
Yeah.
And, having to work in environments where, the usual ways of doing things don't work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think with planets in fall and detriment as well, they can symbolize difficulty finding the right context to be
Yeah.
expressed in. And I've been, thinking about Mars and Cancer, right on the ascendant there, and how, Mars in particular, um, is, as a planet, regardless of what sign it's in, uh, its energy isn't appropriate in every circumstance. It's a really good example of a planet that is just not always the appropriate response.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think of Mars in detriment or fall, and I'm reminded of that moment in The Simpsons. There's that episode of The Simpsons where Homer gets a gun, and there's that moment where he says, "Watch me turn on the TV," and he just like shoots the TV on. He
Ooh, I like
turns off
that.
the
That's a
lights
great analogy.
by shooting off the light bulbs, and it's just like, not now, Mars. Like, this
Yeah.
isn't the right context for this sort of
Mm-hmm.
behavior. There is, possibly a context for this kind of behavior, but it is not here. And there aren't a lot of contexts where that kind of energy is actually appropriate. And I think Mars in fall or detriment might struggle with that a little bit, where it's like Mars in Cancer has something very valuable to offer, but what it has to offer, is like maybe a little niche in a way. Like, it needs to find an
Mm-hmm.
appropriate venue, where it kind of fits the situation. And it may be an experience of, just having, a challenge as far as finding a place where, your particular talents fit or are of service, or like having to be creative. Another Mars and Cancer image I always have is the droid IG-11 in The Mandalorian, who starts off as an assassin
I haven't watched that
droid.
yet. Mm-hmm.
Um, oh, I don't want to spoil it for you, but he starts off as an assassin droid, and at some point over the course of the show, he's reprogrammed into a nanny droid.
Mm-hmm.
So, he's still an assassin, like he's still a total badass, but his motives have been changed to, protecting a baby, instead of,
Mm-hmm.
working for, whoever was hiring him to do whatever terrible job. So it's like that, to me, that's Mars and Cancer, where it's like, how does Mars express Mars in the context of Cancer? That's going to be
Mm-hmm.
tricky to figure out how to do that in a way that is constructive, but it can be
Yeah.
done. It just requires a little bit of creative thinking to figure out, how do we make this work in this context?
Yeah. Absolutely. I do want to end up talking about like the actually technically very nice things that are happening in your chart.
Yes, there are a lot
Um,
of them. There are a
yeah.
lot of nice things in this chart.
Yeah. part of that, I mean, involves that, Mars has a lot of reception with planets in signs that Mars is comfortable in. So, I mean, there's like connections to Mars having outlets, or Mars having training or something. Mars having I like outlets. Actually, I want to go back into my data, but one of my favorite UFC fighter charts was it was like a Mars in Cancer with Mars opposing Uranus in Capricorn, which is sign of its exaltation. It was a trine Pluto, and I believe Venus was in Aries as well. Um, it's like giving like Mars like all the Mars tools to kind of like what you were saying. Like it's like finding a way to express that appropriately is often very hard. Usually Mars in Cancer, uh, like the feelings get hurt very often easily. There's a sensitivity there, and Mars is not, used to giving an F about about what other people think, and it just wants to do its thing, get its job done,
Yeah.
accomplish its mission.
Yeah, it's
But when
action, it's doing. It's not, I don't have
yeah,
time to worry about how other people are going to react to this. And so,
yeah,
in Libra or Cancer, those are signs where, you have to consider what other people might think or what other people might feel before you act.
hmm
And Mars is not, that's not what comes naturally to Mars at all.
yeah, and so I mean the reactions can be extreme and in different directions, So I think you'd have to like talk to somebody, with any given placement, but particularly like more extreme placements like that to see what their particular experience is with it. But lost my train of thought. Click my thought. I don't have a fall on Mercury, but I feel like I do sometimes. It might be
Well,
better
you
if it
do.
was on that axis.
Yeah, I guess, that's sometimes the advantage there is that if Mercury is fallen, you're more inclined to want to do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, I want to do something about it, but it's almost like planets in detriment or in fall. It's like they have very obvious sight lines to where they do well.
Yes.
Like like I can see the place that I do well. It's right there across the Gulf.
Yeah.
And I want to traverse that and get there. But when I make a peregrine planet, maybe worse. I don't know. Like we're just kind of like I don't know what the solution is. I don't know what the
Yeah, like I can't see
I
where
don't even
I'm
know what the problem
supposed to
is.
be or like where would be a good place for me to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, no idea.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I do feel like to jump into some of the more traditionally nice things in this chart. Mars is being bona fide by Venus. Venus is in Aries in the 10th house, and Mars is in Cancer in the first. So Venus is earlier in zodiacal order and squaring Mars, which is a good thing for Mars. And they are both sect mates. They're both night planets. So it's kind of nice that Mars is getting a boost from its sect mate, and of course Venus is in Aries, Mars's sign. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so there's some sympathy and understanding there. So that is actually like a really cool relationship that potentially softens the harder edges of Mars. And because Venus is in Aries, like Venus is in Mars's domicile. So, Venus in a way can kind of, if Mars is missing stuff at home, like, man, in order to do my job, I really need this thing. But I don't have it here because I'm in this weird place in Cancer where nothing makes sense to me. And Venus is like, well, I've got you. I can, I'm in your house right now. Let me know what you
Yeah.
need. And Venus will
Mm-hmm.
send what Mars needs, to make things work in Cancer. So that aspect really, really changes the interpretation of Mars and Cancer on the ascendant, where like, yeah, it's a little unusual, it's a little challenging, but Mars is getting, really valuable support from back at home.
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that I like, and this may seem counterintuitive at first, but so Venus is retrograde in Karoliina's chart, and what I actually like about that is that I think that it increases the affinity between Venus and Mars. Not that Venus turns into Mars when it's retrograde, but Venus is It's about like challenging consensus to some degree, kind of going against consensus for the sake of creating better, more unity in a sense. So like, it's a much more going against the grain sort of Venus. I like to think of like people with like very offbeat, eccentric fashion style. I think I've seen Venus retrogrades in fashion designers, but as opposed to like unifying and like blending in and being the same as everyone else, Venus retrograde is like wants to create new, different, using the fashion analogy, like a new fashion, new style, that challenges and goes against what has already existed. Venus is often potentially very creative when it's retrograde.
I really like that.
It's not just trying to create peace and harmony and make things fit nicely together. It's like let's try that, that leopard skin, that leopard print jacket with my tie-dye leggings. See how that goes. Oh, you don't like it? Well, I like it, and in 10 years it's gonna be what's cool. It's gonna be what's in because I fucking said so.
I love the idea of Venus retrograde connecting with fashion design, because a big part of fashion is recycling old fashions. Like at some point,
Yeah.
whatever was cool a few decades later becomes retro, and like there's a new spin on it. And that is now what is cool. So I feel like there's a little bit of that reaching back into the past to come up with something new. That Venus retrograde in Aries might, because Venus in a cardinal sign, and forward thinking sign like Aries is going to want to do something that's never been seen before or set a trend or whatever. And a retrograde is going to look back into the past and look at like, okay, what worked in the past, what was cool then, and how can I kind of remix this for the present era.
Yeah, and Venus has that. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just you got me thinking about Venus's sort of primary function is to unify and create peace. And I actually gave a sermon about this subject once. I used to do a little bit of work in church ministry in a past life, before I became a heathen, heretic, whatever.
I would love to hear you give a sermon. I think we should have a segment of the show where Tristan gives a sermon, an astrology sermon.
Well, maybe I think astrology has become sort of that outlet for me because, I'm no longer Christian and no longer involved in the church, but a lot of the work I did for the church was very fulfilling. And so astrology lets me kind of do some of that stuff.
I think knowing that about you is going to change the way I listen to you forever now.
It'd be like listening to the preacher.
Yeah, nobody will be able to see me, but I'm just going to have my hands raised and my eyes are closed. I'm going to be looking up at the sky while I'm listening to Tristan talk, because Tristan is connecting me with the Lord.
Now I'm connecting people with the stars, I guess, in an animistic sense instead of
that's more relevant to me.
Yeah. So they're
actually up there.
Yeah, I know. You can actually see them. It's nice.
Yeah.
It's like that George Carlin bit about sun worship. You can actually see the sun.
Yeah,
it actually you can literally prove that it allows life on Earth, so it makes sense to worship. Sorry, I don't want to offend any listeners of various religious persuasions. But I know it's true. If this is the trouble, right, with religion, is that whatever your position is, it contradicts somebody else's position, and so then what do you do? Anyway, I
shouldn't make fun of it as much as I do, but
and I still I actually had a really good time with the church. I was involved in really progressive, rebellious in a good way kinds of churches. So, I still really appreciate that time. But anyway, I gave a sermon about that there's a famous passage in the Gospels that, is very controversial, where Jesus says, do you think I came to earth to create peace? I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. It's essentially I've come to bring strife. And I gave a whole sermon about the concept of peace and how there is a difference between, there's sort of two different kinds of peace. There's the peace that comes as the result of ignoring our problems and ignoring injustices and just refusing to rock the boat. When you
Mm-hmm.
know something is wrong, you just don't, you just toe the party line. You don't do anything about it. And the kind of peace that comes from actually having justice. And, in order to get that peace, you actually have to create a disturbance first.
Mm-hmm.
And the example that I used in my sermon was, so I'm also a big hockey fan, and several years ago, Braden Holtby won the Stanley Cup with the Washington Capitals, and Trump was president at the time, and it is a tradition for Stanley Cup winning hockey teams to visit the White House and visit the president. And Braden Holtby was the goalie for the Washington Capitals, and he refused to go. And this was a big deal because most of the team still went. A couple players on the team refused to go because they were like, I don't want to go down in history being seen, photographed with Donald Trump, who's responsible for all these horrible things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like hockey culture is very conservative, not just like in a political sense, but in the sense that like team the team comes first before the individual. And it's all
Mm-hmm.
about sort of like conserving the tradition and not rocking the boat and not deviating from your team, like being, um, too much of an individual celebrity is also kind of discouraged, or like showing too much personality because it's taking attention away from the team and putting it on an individual. So it's like a really, he's breaking away from this very sort of unified, I feel like this is sort of the shadow side of Venus, where it's like in order for this team to remain cohesive and everyone to get along and like each other, we can't do anything divisive. And he made a decision to stand by his principles and do
Mm-hmm.
something divisive. And, ultimately the team ended up supporting him and everything was fine. But I feel like that's sort of the meaning of Venus and Aries to me, is like, in order to get to peace, we need to actually sometimes deviate from the group mentality. We sometimes have to do or say things that are not nice, that ruffle feathers. And that like supportive relationship, between this retrograde Venus and Aries and Mars and Cancer, I think really illustrates that kind of um, understanding of the world, and the willingness to actually say, like, I am going to do something that, especially since Venus is right up there in the 10th house, pretty visible. I mean, is it under the beams, or it's
Yeah,
sort
it's
of on the
it's
borderline there. I think it's still
yeah.
pretty visible.
I
And
almost don't hate that though, because the sun is
yeah,
exalted,
yeah,
and it's like Venus maybe can't be seen by itself. Like it I feel like planets under the beams to some degree. It's like the sun sort of takes over, or they have to express themselves through the sun.
yeah. But that's not the worst sun you could express yourself through. It
No, it's a great
is,
sun.
I mean, it's a heroic sun too. So it is kind of
Mm-hmm.
like being willing to take a risk, in order to do what is right, being willing to
Mm-hmm.
take a risk for the sake of the things that Venus stands for, which is, a world in which people enjoy peace and harmony and, enjoy things that are fun and pleasurable and, have the leisure time. And we can't
And to
have
say
those
something that's
things.
unpopular, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. We can't have any of those things without actual justice.
yeah, no, retrograde Venus makes me think of actually specifically with your chart, Carolina. Is I don't know, it makes me think of like the tyranny of the majority, which democracies run into, right? When we may all agree on a law, but that law is not just. That law is broken, or that law is actually creating strife and conflict. I think like Venus retrograde is, that's when Venus retrograde steps in as like, no, this may be popular, but this is not good. This is actually creating more strife and disharmony.
Yeah.
And I feel like that combination Mars in Cancer. I feel like that's maybe an important part of your life is maybe having to advocate for or say the unpopular thing for the um, sake of being, right. Or not right, but
For
for
the sake of
sticking to
like
your principles.
Venusian,
Yeah.
yeah, Venusian principles, which are
Yeah.
all like nice things,
Hmm.
like Venus wants nice things.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it's yeah, Venus like makes Mars a lot more well intentioned overall. Not that it can't be
yeah,
by itself, but yeah, I mean that can be a very uncomfortable position to be in, though, too.
yes.
To be, saying the things that other people don't want to hear.
But you do have that exalted sun in the 10th, and you also have that opposition from Jupiter to help perhaps smooth that over and make the things that you want to
It's a
say
very exact opposition.
more resonant. Yeah, it's a very I that caught my eye immediately because I
Hmm.
was like, okay, well, Venus is in detriment here, but also has reception with Jupiter, which is in Venus's sign of
Hmm.
Libra. So Venus and Jupiter have an understanding, and Jupiter um, is able, much like Venus is kind of able to send Mars things from home that Mars might need. Jupiter is in a similar position here, where Jupiter is in Venus's house, and Jupiter's nature is to want to help. And I
Hmm.
think the nature of an opposition with benefics involved is actually stabilizing, because the opposition is the aspect of Saturn. And so it has a sort of, stuckness or rigidity to it. It tends to slow things down. But when you're talking about benefics, I think that's a more pleasant potential manifestation of that kind of like slow, steady energy. Um, it's been, my experience with, I have Jupiter very loosely opposing my moon in Scorpio. And I sometimes feel like that's my saving grace, or like my moon in Scorpio tends to go to extremes, but there's, sweet, gentle Jupiter in Taurus, just sort of like take a moment.
Hmm.
And offers that kind of like that strong steady hand on your shoulder that kind of steadies you and allows you to center yourself before you react. I think Jupiter can offer some of that to Venus, and also Jupiter happens to be in the sign of Libra, which is all about justice. So maybe some of that symbolism is being repeated here,
Yeah.
of being good. And you're talking about the law, and laws can be popularly agreed on, but still be unjust or corrupt. And Jupiter is the law.
Hmm.
And Jupiter in Libra is assessing and judging whether or not laws are fair.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like Venus has a planet in Libra, and it's Jupiter. Jupiter is a good role model. Venus like knows not that it's by choice so much, but it's like Venus knows how to be Venus if it needs to be. I don't know. I imagine like you're able to be agreeable in all that when you need to be, but it's maybe not your inclination to some degree, or maybe not what you need to do to maybe solve that Grand Cross. I could see like
Yeah.
um, I don't know. I guess I'd be interested in maybe how to what degree some themes like this might have played out for Jet as well. Is like I don't know, like with a Grand Cross, it's like because there's so much energy being fed into that aspect pattern. It's like you gotta like flow with it to some degree. You have to it's like kind of demanding an outlet. I guess thinking about like Mars like on the ascendant in the first, and because it's like I feel like usually like the out of sect malefic is something is like something that you want to like contain or manage or curtail, sort of like instinctively. I feel like I don't know speaks to me more as like I don't know. It's like something about difficulties around self-expression to some degree, like finding courage to be different.
Yeah, that's a good I feel like that's a good sort of key phrase for Mars and Cancer in the first house, is, having the courage to stand out in some way. And I don't know, it's interesting, as somebody with a fallen out of sect planet ruling my first. I remember, back in my online dating days in the distant past, there was a match question on OkCupid, the dating site,
Remember this?
which is, would you rather be normal or weird?
Oh yeah.
Um, and it always made me pause because I am very much weird, and I've spent my whole life being told in no uncertain terms that that is what I am by everyone around me.
Hmm.
But I often kind of resent being weird, and I often think about how much easier my life would be if I didn't stand out. And I go through phases of kind of trying to present myself in a way that makes me stand out less, and I just can't keep it up, and it's frustrating because it's like I'm not trying to get attention by being weird. This isn't some like narcissistic thing. I just want to be myself and be left alone. Like I don't actually want people making comments about me. But so like if I just had more normal tastes and and more normal interests, and more, if I did what was expected of me, my life would go much smoother, and I wouldn't draw attention to myself, and I'd be able to fly under the radar.
Hmm.
But for some reason it's just not in my nature.
Yeah.
And I think, making peace with, I'm probably never going to have a quote unquote normal life, is sort of part of my journey right now, is being at peace with that. And I don't know, Karoliina, if you can relate to that at all. But if you can, maybe that's part of your Mars in Cancer on the ascendant journey too, is just like being okay with being different, and standing out for who you are and what makes you unique, even if that's sometimes challenging, or results in attention or reactions that you'd rather not deal with.
No, I think, well, it's something that you and Karoliina both have. So the sun exalted in the 10th, but just like the sun in the 10th in general, it's like it's like you can't help but like attract attention.
Yeah.
It's not, whether you want it or not, it's kind of like there. I don't know, like you're just gonna tend to draw more attention, I think, with the sun in the 10th.
Yeah. And in Aries, it's just the sun, everything sort of, the sun is magnetic, and it's the brightest thing there is.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is looking at it. Everyone's revolving around it. You kind of can't escape it.
Yeah, what a curse.
It is the gift and the curse of the exalted sun is just like not being able to kind of go anywhere unnoticed. It's not a stealthy placement.
Yeah, whether you want to be looked at or not, it's
Yeah.
the visibility is sort of unavoidable. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think for you, Tristan, with the moon in Scorpio, and for you, Karoliina, with the moon in the 4th house, is, there's maybe a tendency more towards preferring privacy, preferring not wanting to have all the attention. I would think for you, Karoliina, with, I don't know, being compelled or impelled to challenge the status quo, maybe having to reconcile getting attention for it, maybe accepting the attention and doing it anyway is part of the journey.
Or maybe, finding the spaces where
it's received.
the attention makes sense. Yeah, where it's received well. That's another sort of challenge, is, finding where's the right space for me to shine, where, it's not making unreasonable demands of me.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add, part of what's positive, though, about just Mars in Cancer is that it's the ruler of the 10th and the 5th. It's being on your ascendant. While it does have like the out of sect Mars job, it's also, those are powerful, more positive houses. And to have that planet on your ascendant is, comes with what traditionally would be called like eminence,
Yeah, where it's bringing the significations of the 5th and the 10th houses into the 1st house, where they're sort of part of your identity, and where you have a lot of, potentially a lot of agency over those topics, and they're very visible to other people. I mean, having the 5th house, being very visible to people, I mean, that could be fun. Maybe you're really fun to hang out with at a party.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess it's not. Come on, I don't know you, so I'm just saying it could come with like sex appeal too.
Yeah, this is true. That like sort of
Fifth house is the
unusual,
sex house, sexy
yeah,
house.
like unusual sex appeal. Um, the Mars maltreating the moon and Jupiter, is, one of the more sort of challenging aspects in the chart, and part of that grand cross where Mars in Cancer is overcoming Jupiter and the moon in the fourth house in Libra. And I think maybe that is a repetition of some of the themes of, a bit of the tension between the 10th house and the fourth house potentially, um, where, the moon in the fourth house, wants privacy, and, the moon in Libra wants peace. It doesn't want to deal with, extreme situations, or, extreme people, or conflict, or fighting, or arguments, or any of that kind of stuff. It just wants everything to go smoothly, and, wants to be able to relax. And, Mars being in this very visible part of the chart, maybe, is another illustration of some potential tension there between the desire for privacy and the desire for, you know, things, on a social level to just kind of go easily and nicely without disagreements. And then, this Mars in the first house that's just like, no, we need to, say things that people don't want to hear, and, we're going to stand out in a really visible way. So there's two, and it's like we were talking about the Grand Cross and kind of competing drives or impulses. Like those are two potential competing impulses in this chart. And Mars is going to have a bit of a tendency to get the upper hand, but there's also, again, reception, because the moon is in, or Mars is in the moon's sign. So that also like potentially softens the tension there, and creates more potential for compromise between those two areas of life.
But with Mars overcoming those fourth house planets, sort of like doing some damage to like the privacy, even, like, yeah, say the things that people don't want to hear is maybe just like part of like what you're called to do to some degree, maybe at some point, and have like your sort of privacy disturbed by that, or yeah, that feels like, I mean, just having to do something that it's like a hard choice, or I don't know,
Mm.
like maybe wanting to keep the peace, like be Venus, but Venus is also like, now we got to challenge consensus. So
I see where you're coming from, and it's, making me think about situation, an example from my own life right now. Like the fourth house in Karoliina's chart is a little mixed. It's a little confusing because you've got the benefic of the sect in favor, that being
mm,
Jupiter, in the fourth house. And, in a day chart, Jupiter is traditionally the most positive planet. And so where Jupiter is located should generally, indicate where things tend to go well and go easily and be pleasant and enjoyable. Like, potentially some of the most fulfilling or enjoyable topics of life will be found where Jupiter is. But, um, Jupiter's also retrograde and in sort of a complicated, maltreatment with Mars, but there's also like some reception there by exaltation, because Cancer is Jupiter's exaltation. But, Mars doesn't really understand Libra very well. So, there's a little bit of potential for relating to each other here, but I'd still say overall it's quite a tense relationship between Mars and Jupiter. So yeah, it's like in theory, home and family should be like some of the most enjoyable experiences in this chart, and then Mars is kind of getting in there and being like, I'm going to cause problems. But
yeah,
I don't actually really think of it as Mars causing problems, and I think that's a lesson I'm learning right now, as someone who also has Cancer rising and has a Libra fourth house like Karoliina does. Um,
mm,
I am in a Mars year, as is Karoliina. Actually, I checked. We're both,
fifth house,
yeah,
right?
fifth house. So we're both having Mars years, and so Mars is and Kyle too. So like all three of us really we're all in the same boat here, where
Cancer risings with Mars.
Mars
Is their
transiting the
lord.
fourth house. Yeah, Mars in Mars in detriment transiting the fourth house.
Actually, my solar return chart this year looks a lot like Karoliina's. Had Mars exactly on my ascendant for solar return to the minute.
Oh, that's interesting.
I actually got pulled over the next day, the day after my birthday, because my license was expired for 1 day. It had been expired for 1 day, and I got legal hell. But, you know, Mars also rules my 10th. Started 2 podcasts actually this year. So, yeah, you take the good with the bad.
Well, that's the thing, right? Is that the malefics represent extremes, and I think we tend to think of the malefics as representing all the bad stuff, forgetting that extremes mean that there is extreme good and extreme bad. And I mean, that's certainly been my experience of my Mars year so far. Is it's a roller coaster where it's like absolute euphoria, everything's going well, tons of opportunities are being handed to you, and then the worst of the worst, everything is falling apart, and then we go back up. And it's I think maybe why people are sometimes express disappointment about Jupiter transits, and it's like, well, if the time of your life when Jupiter was making that transit was really genuinely Jupitery, it probably would have just gone by without any fanfare, because it's just like easy and things come naturally. And it's the Mars energy that's like, wow, that was really amazing, and then that was really terrible, sort of like all at once or one after the other.
Yeah. Like Jupiter might pass you the ball, but you still got to run with it.
Yeah. But yeah, the sort of experience I'm having with Mars and Libra transiting my fourth house right now is I've got like weird family stuff going on, and it has I guess in my life I've been very characteristically a Venus ruled fourth house kind of person, where my approach to family is I just try to be relaxed and live or let live, and just kind of end up ignoring a lot of problems and not asserting myself. And just sort of being agreeable in situations where I should actually be standing up for myself. But it's been the kind of case where I've been able to get away with that for a long time. And now that Mars is going through my fourth house, I'm going through a situation where it's sort of like, oh, I can't ignore this anymore. There's actually like serious dysfunction here. And I think that can be one of the qualities of Mars, where maybe the moon and Jupiter in Libra and Karoliina's fourth house, they just want to be kind of live and let live when it comes to issues at home. Whether those are physical issues with like the actual house, or their dynamics within a family, or what have you, any sort of fourth house topics, they're going to be a little more laid back about it. And sometimes being laid back about things causes us to miss problems until they've been kind of building for so long that it becomes really hard to change them. And Mars is kind of the energy that we need to shake us out of those ruts a little bit.
Actually, yeah, I think it's funny that Tristan and I have been talking about this a lot since Mars got into Libra, but both having just kind of like annoying like family problems sort of come up. Mars transits the fourth house in a Mars ruled perfection year. I'd be really curious. Actually, hope that you maybe let us know, Karoliina, if you're having any annoying family problems come up right now.
Or annoying like house problems. Like,
yeah,
I think when Keith and I first moved in, my partner and I first moved into our new house, we actually have a well, which is in mundane astrology, wells are ruled by the fourth house. And I think Mars was going through his fourth house, and the well broke. So it's just like, and I feel like it's easy to tell a narrative where it's like, oh, Mars is coming and fucking things up, but it's actually not that. Like, Mars is antagonizing so much, as Mars is pointing out that like, hey, this thing's been breaking down for a really long time, and if you just put like a little bit too much pressure on it right now, it's going to utterly collapse. So like, you now are forced to address it.
Yeah, you gotta do some work, do some Mars.
Yeah, you got to do the Mars work, which is the work to sort of maintain a I guess, adequate level of
Yeah.
existence, like fixing your well or, dealing with annoying family members.
Yeah. There's another chart thing I wanted to point out I find interesting is so Mercury is in Pisces in the ninth house. But it's actually has Antitia with Jupiter and Venus. Um, it's within, what is that? It's like a couple degrees off, but it's like within what I would call the range of the Antitia. So it's like kind of being received by Jupiter through that Antitia. For listeners unfamiliar with Antitia, it has to do with the equinoctial points, right? So like the Pisces Aries cusp, the Virgo Libra cusp, the Capricorn Sagittarius cusp, and the Gemini Cancer cusp. And when you think of like the planets being able to see each other by a traditional aspect, is one form of affinity, but the Antitia was another form of affinity, another way for planets to interact with each other, as opposed to just being like in aversion, because they're the same distance away from the solstice points. I can never remember what to call those things, but
The equinox points, because I think the solstice, yeah, one is contra Antitia is solstice points, I think,
mm-hmm.
if I'm remembering this correctly. But yeah, the symbolism has to do with like having the same amount of light. That's what gives them affinity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's like a relationship with the planets, kind of like a mitigated aversion. But Mercury is like in this kind of interesting position to like, because Mercury is the translator, to sort of be a voice for those two planets, and it's in a applying trine with Mars on the ascendant. So I don't know if you'd maybe do any kind of writing or be like philosophical or like spiritual activities, like ninth house activities. Um,
Astrology.
Astrology, yeah.
Mercury is the planet of
Yeah.
astrology in the house of
Yeah.
astrology in your chart, Karoliina. So hint, hint, nudge, nudge.
Oh, Mercury is it's in retrograde. Mercury and Mars are going to be together, so maybe that's why you wanted to reach out to astrology. Blah, blah, blah. Recording for like 2 hours now, 2.5 hours. Maybe coincides with you reaching out to a couple of astrologers, but um, yeah, I don't know if you do any writing, but that could be a really good way of I don't know. I always like my mind jumps to remediation or just like ways to like positive ways to like live out a chart. Writing, get to write something controversial, or if you have like big opinions, write them.
um, one last little thing I wanted to point out as an interesting mitigating factor in this chart. Um, Before I actually attempt to answer the question properly and not just sit here and analyze Karoliina's chart all night, which is proving to be a really fun
Oh
exercise for
yeah,
me. Thank you for sharing your chart.
this
This
is a
is
fun
great.
chart.
This is a fun
Interesting. I
chart.
mean, yeah, I want to be dismissive of some of the challenges that can be described in a chart, but can be what is nice about astrology too is that you can sort of look at the fun side of things too, and
Yeah, I think that's. Sorry, go
no,
ahead.
you go ahead. I was saying you go ahead. No,
No, you
no,
go
you.
ahead. Now we're gonna channel the energy of Mars on the ascendant. Or like, Venus and Aries, where it's like, I'm gonna be aggressively polite.
I'm
You
so
go
fucking polite.
first. No, absolutely, I will kill you if you don't
Yeah.
go first. It's the
I like that.
Venus and Aries in Karoliina's chart, or Mars transiting through Libra right now. We're channeling the energy of one or both of them. Venus in Aries in Karoliina's chart is actually in its own term. So
Oh yeah,
the
it
for
is.
those unfamiliar with the subdivisions of the zodiac signs, there are various methods of dividing the zodiac signs into smaller sections that also have symbolic meaning. And term or bound is a really ancient one where each zodiac sign is kind of unevenly divided, and each section is ruled by its own planet. So in Karoliina's chart, Venus at 8 degrees of Aries is in its own bound or term. And one way to interpret this is it's a type of essential dignity, and it's kind of like Venus is in, um, the best room in the house. So Venus is in Mars's house because it's in Aries, which is an awkward place for Venus to find itself. But Venus at least has the nicest room in Mars's house, which, gives it a little bit of a boost. And, because it's also in the overcoming position over Mars, it, has a little bit of power. So, I kind of think of this as like, she's a guest in Mars's house, and Mars is kind of making his best effort to give her a space of her own where she can be comfortable, even though she's so far from her actual home. So it's like, Venus can have the most Venus-y room in Mars's house and can kind of make some demands of Mars, like, I don't really like the food here. I'm tired of eating red meat and drinking whiskey. Like, I, want some souffle or whatever, Venus would want to eat. And can kind of, get a little bit of room, demand a little bit of room service from Mars here.
No, so actually, I love this. I'm just realizing. I remember this because I wrote an article on it. Was the lunation this year, March 28th, the full moon in Libra. It was when Venus was Cazimi, the sun in Aries, and opposing exactly the moon in Libra at the exact same degree in your chart, Karoliina, 8 degrees when it was in its own bound. It's actually interesting that that happened, and it would have been a Venus-ruled year. So I'm wondering if something interesting might happen for you March 28th of 2021. I'm just figuring this out, so I don't have like a off-the-cuff interpretation for that, but I feel like I'm giving Karoliina a lot of homework. So I'm sorry, but if I really want to know now, if you want to shoot us an email or something, if anything happened like around the end of March, because that full moon is interesting, and I thought it was a really interesting position for Venus to be in its own term, and then Cassimi, like an exalted sun. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, the term that Venus is in that gives like. It's like better equipped, Actually, I feel like it's a really good position for a retrograde Venus in Aries to be in, like where it has like all the tools to do its job, because it is like a little more of a challenger, and it has, access to the Venus section of the arsenal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, it's still a challenging placement fundamentally, but ultimately also has access to resources that are going to enable it to meet those challenges.
Yeah.
In terms of, dealing with difficult aspects, which is one of the questions Karoliina asked, how do you react to challenging aspects?
Panic.
Or panic, freak out, as my dog is doing right now. Kitsu took your injunction to panic very seriously. My dog also has a Moon Mars square in his chart, and he's very good at.
Oh yeah, that's like one of the few things we don't have in common in our charts. You don't have the Moon Mars square.
No, I still get panic moon because it's in a Mars sign, but the moon and Mars are sextile in my chart, so that's a little, I don't know. I guess I know how to manage my panic when it happens, hopefully. Maybe that's what that
means. Your panic is more unjustified.
I hope that's what it means. Justified panic.
Unjustified,
Or more
everything's
unjustified.
actually fine, but...
Oh, right, I see what you're saying.
Everything's sextile, Tristan, it's okay. No, I'm kidding.
One piece of advice for dealing with any sort of contradiction or, two impulses or two areas of life that, require some kind of reconciliation or compromise, is to give them a common goal. So, if the planet's involved in a challenging aspect, share some kind of goal in common. They're more likely to work together in spite of their differences. So just kind of looking at your chart for examples, Mars and the moon are both connected to your first house because your first house is ruled by the moon, and Mars is, right there on the ascendant. So, both of these planets, in a sense, are being tasked with helping you to establish a really strong sense of individual identity, helping you to cultivate self esteem, that kind of thing. And, if you're able to kind of get those two impulses working together towards, sort of the common goal of like a healthy, strong sense of identity, that can be a way of reconciling those.
Yeah, I mean, so how to react would be not to do what I said earlier because I was joking, but yeah, don't panic because I do think there's a lot of things that you and I and everyone can do that and already do that work with those difficult aspects. But I mean, I guess you got to like take it on a case by case basis because like I tend to think that the aspect in the chart, the planets involved and everything can describe, um, a problem. It also kind of has like the solution sort of built into it too. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't find that most things, I mean, certain things are irreconcilable. Like, I don't know, probably not going to enjoy like coffee beans in your peanut butter and jelly or something. But, usually there are ways that you can integrate something like a square or something that kind of points to a dichotomy or something that seems a conflict. But there's also I'm not a psychologist, can't do diagnose anything, but read a lot about psychology and uh, a lot of the way that it's approached. It's not so much about fixing what's wrong with you. It's not really what it's about. It's about, I don't know, forgiving yourself for not being perfect, for not having all exalted planets that are all trine and sextile to each other. Like, we're all imperfect creatures, and it's also kind of what makes us interesting and unique, and um, how we react to challenges and the creative ways that we find to solve those problems. I don't know. Sometimes I like to look at like some of my difficult placements as like a quest or something, like a problem that I have been tasked to solve.
I like that.
I don't know. I think that's what's cool about astrology is that you get the symbolic framework for looking at things, and you can use that in a very negative way, and you can play with that and find ways to tell the story differently.
Mm,
The astrology is great because it calls attention to tendencies that you may already be aware of, but maybe puts them into a context that's like easier to identify and potentially makes it easier to work with because you have a language to describe it.
I really like that about how, there are different ways to tell the story. Astrology gives you different ways of telling your story, and you can look at it through from many different perspectives. One of my pieces of advice for navigating challenging placements is having a sense of humor. Like I know one of Kyle's pet charts that we discussed on a recent episode is Will Ferrell, who has, a lot of um, debilitated planets in his chart. And, they are expressed through comedy, where it's like there's an incongruity to planets in fall or detriment. And that kind of incongruity, like something being in a place where it's not supposed to be, is the core of humor. So finding a way to express those things through humor is one way. That's one perspective you can take. But of course, like I also appreciated what you were saying earlier. When we were talking about this being a fun chart to analyze, but not wanting to sound dismissive, because another perspective you can take on your chart, like you can take the perspective on your chart of this is fun, and I can kind of see the humor in my life using this framework, but you can also take the perspective that, I can see some of the hardest things that have happened in my life in my chart, right? So depending on the perspective you're looking at your chart from, and I certainly, don't want to suggest that, life is just all fun and games and that's, the best way to look at your chart. Sometimes um, you will find that, the symbolism in your chart can say something about a particularly difficult situation that happened in your life, that's become a really important or influential
Mm-hmm.
part of your story. Um, and, looking um, at the astrology more seriously and using it to help you tell the story of some of the harder things that have happened in your life can also be healing. And give you a language for talking about them and figuring out how they fit into your life story in a meaningful way. And like I was saying, there's some things in life that are just irreconcilable. But there are some things in life that are difficult, but we're able to sort of find meaning in them regardless. And the symbols of astrology are really rich for helping us to find meaning in those difficult circumstances.
Yeah. Uh, that was like the only other thing I wanted to say was that you make meaning out of it, you know? I think since our last episode, we were exploring the scienciness or the not scienciness of astrology, and kind of regardless of like where you come down on uh, what is or isn't, objectively true about astrology, it's a tool for meaning making, and there is no objective
Mm-hmm.
single meaning to things. It's like our job as humans is we do the meaning making, and astrology is a great tool for that, and can really astrology is very Jupitery in the sense of that it can very much stabilize and affirm meaning in certain ways. Like, oh yeah, this came up this time and like connects with this, and maybe this means that I didn't get picked on and made fun of in high school for nothing. That there's something to be gained from that, or
Mm-hmm.
something that can be made positive out of that. And that's not to say that like, oh yeah, get picked on in high school, that'll be great. It's to say that yeah, that sucks, but like we can turn that into we can find gems in that. We can become people that empathize with people that were bullied, or um, we can be equipped with the tools to help, yeah, to help those people, or whatever. Uh, there's lots of ways to make meaning, and I guess I sometimes I wish I was like one of those astrologers that had like a really strict sense of beliefs that, I could tell clients like, oh, well, this means that in a past life, this and that, and you're in this life to heal that wound. I wish I could tell people that. And I don't disagree with those ideas or statements. I just don't know if it's my particular personal role to say those things. But I mean, yeah, I think at the end of the day, give yourself credit too, I guess, for all the things you've done to make that work, all the work you've done to make progress. If you got a bad traditional Venus, focus on like take some time to focus on like the ways that you've been Venus to people or in your life, because you have. I don't know anybody who hasn't been a little bit Venus. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think that I know early on in astrology for me, particularly Hellenistic astrology, uh, would look at like the negative things that were being described. Um, but I kind of forgot to give myself credit for all the things that I've done to manage that. And your chart can't take that away from you, I guess. Um, doesn't mean you're doomed to fail at this. It means you have a challenge here, and you might do the work to make the best of that or to turn that around. But it might, um, I don't know, it almost makes like your achievements that area like more earned or deserved in some ways because they weren't like handed to you, or the world wasn't built to accommodate your particular inclinations. You had to carve out your niche.
Yeah, I like that, having to carve out your niche. I think that really is one of the important lessons of debilitated planets. Um, and just, thinking more about the different perspectives you can take when you approach those placements. When I think about my own debilitated planets, like to use, my moon in Scorpio as an example. Um, I have anxiety disorders, I have OCD, and those, the symbolism of the moon in Scorpio really connects with those experiences to me. And, that's some of the most difficult stuff that I deal with in my life. Like I don't feel like I'm a better person because I have OCD. My life would be better if I didn't have it. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. There's no like benefit, at least for me. Maybe other people have a different perspective on their own illness, but for me, like, there's no benefit to having it. The challenges it's brought to my life, haven't really done anything of value for me. Um, but it's part of my story, and I can see it reflected in my moon sign, and that makes me feel seen. It makes me feel seen, by the cosmos, and some of the ways of managing that stuff is also communicated by that symbol. So it's not just, sort of reflecting my experience and giving me an alternative way of describing that experience, but the skills or what's in the toolbox of the moon in Scorpio, offers me potentially some guidance for how to manage that. And so, that's one way that, the moon in Scorpio is meaningful to me, and it's describing something pretty negative, and pretty hard. But on the other hand, if I look at my chart through a more fun perspective, my moon in Scorpio also describes some things that are like pretty neutral or pretty funny or goofy, because it's an awkward placement for the moon. It's like the moon in Scorpio is in the fifth house. The fifth house is supposed to be, how we have fun and take pleasure in things, and what we value. And I'm like an avid bone collector, and my idea of a good time is like going to the entomology section of the library and reading the weirdest thing that would freak everybody else out. Like that's the things that I enjoy are very moon in Scorpio. Like I keep a praying mantis as a pet because like I enjoy that, and it's like that's kind of funny, where it's just like there's this certain weirdness to me that is also symbolized by moon in Scorpio, and I can lean into that and like see the humor and the creativity and uniqueness in that. So there are all of these different outlooks you can take when you're looking at those placements, and some of them might reflect genuinely difficult experiences you've had but offer some guidance as to how to deal with them, and some of them might reflect neutral or even positive experiences even though the placement is unusual or difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there are things to be proud of about
Totally.
Scorpio moon in the fifth house, right? Wouldn't it be great if there was no such thing, if there was no such thing as a fallen planet or planet, or whatever? There were no outcasts. If you're going to have like highly successful people, you're going to have big failures too, right? But I'm proud to be somebody who likes those people, who likes the those stories of the people that fell through the cracks, are refused to, not even refuse, but just by nature aren't don't easily fit into the generally accepted scheme. But I'm glad that there are people like that to love those people, to care about those people, care about those things, situations, and experiences, because they exist, and we have an opportunity to make meaning out of those things. Maybe that's like my job, our job, Tristan. I don't know. So I guess I think of it like that way. Like, oh, yeah, I like to read about serial killers, and I can't think of anything redeeming or positive about that other than, that exists. And there's any meaning to be made out of that. I don't know. Actually, there's nothing good about being interested in that, but a lot of people are. I don't know. I don't know what the redeeming quality of that is.
Maybe it's the motivation behind it. The scorpionic desire to understand the worst parts of human nature. The willingness to face things that we don't generally want to look at in order to understand the extremes of human nature, and to understand how, because I think like the sort of what most people are probably interested in, when they're reading about true crime, is how or why. How did this happen? And if we know how it happens, maybe it can be prevented. And so maybe there is, that interest has redeeming qualities, right? Or like, what if you're into forensics or something, or you investigate these horrible crimes for a living, like you're doing work in a very malefic, maligned, debilitated area of life in order to prevent those circumstances from happening.
Exactly. I don't know if we'll ever be able to like completely eliminate those things, but I think that, we can reduce them. I would say that, the planets have been going around in circles for thousands of years, and awful shit still happens on Earth, and great things still happen on Earth. But the overall quality of life has improved. I think on scale, we're not murdering each other on quite the same scale that we used to. I don't know. Life expectancies have improved. Lots of other things are terrible, but along the path to remediation, I like to think. It's my, optimistic. Cassini Jupiter, maybe, and maybe the moon in Scorpio says everything's fucked and we're all going to die alone. But we got to accept both of those realities because both of them are true.
Yeah, that's it. Multiple perspectives on reality can be true simultaneously.
Yeah.
I guess like one last thing I might want to say is Karoliina did ask about how undignified planets or challenging aspects relate to one's karma, which I think is a great question, but one I am absolutely not qualified to answer. Karma, as I understand it, is a very, very complex, multifaceted philosophical and religious concept that can't really be separated from, the religions and philosophies it belongs to, like in Hinduism or Jainism, for example. So I am certainly, not being of that religious or philosophical background myself, I am not really qualified to speak on how karma plays out in a chart. But I think, if you maybe looked into some Vedic astrologers, there might be some very talented folks who can answer that question for you.
And interpersonally, like in the one-on-one conversation, I'll have all kinds of conversations about
yeah
just the idea of karma, what I think about it, or my constantly changing different philosophically thoughts about such things. But in the context of our podcast and making an authoritative statement, I am not prepared to make a statement on that. So for that specifically, what Tristan said.
Do we want to mention a couple things about remediation?
Yeah.
That's another method, if you do find that something about a difficult placement in your chart resonates with your lived experience, to the extent that like your own agency is able to change those circumstances, remediation can be, sort of like a magical act, that helps support you in taking control of those circumstances.
Yeah. Sorry, were you continuing?
No, I mean, I guess we should probably define remediation.
Yeah. You might have a more exact definition. To me, remediation is like the solutions to maybe the problems that something in your chart is pointing out, or not solutions, but like the ways to mediate or remediate, to smooth that out.
Yeah, smoothing it out is a good way of describing it. A remediation is, say a planet in your chart, symbolizes something difficult for you, and you have a hard time managing the topics or the energy of that planet as it is in your chart. You can do things that are of the nature of that planet or that honor that planet in some way, and that is a form of magic, essentially. And whatever you believe about magic, there are different perspectives on it. For me, it's more of a psychological tool. Like, I don't think the remediation is going to fix all my problems, but it is like a support. And potentially an outlet. So like if you have problems with Mars energy in your life, an example that Kyle uses often is hitting his punching bag. Getting in a really heavy workout is an example of a Mars remediation, because it's honoring Mars and it's giving Mars like a constructive outlet in your life in some way.
And even just like on a practical level, like I'm working on like a series of articles, trying to flesh out my remediation page on my website, and I like it when it's practical. I like it when it fits into established ideas about how people work, outside of astrology. But when if you have a lot of anger and aggression and stuff, well, therapy is good. But finding a healthy outlet for those feelings is good. It's a good thing to do, because repressing feelings sucks, and then they just they blow up and you hurt people, and you don't want to hurt people, especially as a Cancer rising, probably. But yeah, I love the punching bag, and actually, particularly with Mars and Cancer, it kept popping into my head is how many UFC fighters have it, and what you were saying earlier about like the Mars wanting to express itself like inappropriately. It makes sense to me that a lot of those UFC fighters like get into that because it's an appropriate channel for the Mars energy. And so, finding appropriate channels. So I would say swimming, physical activity, water gun fights.
Water gun fights are a good Mars and Cancer remediation. I love that.
If you start like an adult water gun park, that like where adults can shoot each other with water guns and throw water balloons at each other, and
oh my god, that's
capture the flag with water guns. Oh my god, I think that's your destiny.
That's your calling.
Karoliina.
Your Mars rules the 5th house, which is fun and recreation, and it's in your first house in a water sign. Clearly, Karoliina was destined to open an amusement park where people can shoot each other with water guns.
I would love that. That would be so amazing, and I would totally. We would promote your water park on the show. That would be fantastic, but or something like that. I guess that's how I like to approach remediation a lot. But finding constructive manifestations of your chat.
Yeah, I think you found a good Venus retrograde in Aries remediation earlier when you were talking about fashion. And, potentially a good remediative activity for Venus retrograde in Aries is, just not even necessarily, as a professional thing. You could just do it for fun, like designing outfits, or, like Mars and Aries rule sharp things, like pull out the sewing machine, or,
loud colors,
or learn how to tattoo, stuff like that. Yeah.
Ooh,
loud colors, like make a piece of art that's just like really bold and spiky and full of bright colors and hot things.
Yeah,
like creative outlets.
Even if you don't like that, like in your space all the time, like create like an altar to that, like a 90s like hot pink jumpsuit with like spikes for shoulder pads.
Oh yeah. And there's sorry, what were you gonna say?
Nothing. I was really grateful that you were about to talk. Like the impetus was no longer on me.
um, planetary donation is another form of
Oh
remediation where,
yeah.
if there's a planet that's being a pain in your ass, figure out who are that planet's people and support them in some way. And that's, a
Mm-hmm.
way of sort of creating a sense of friendliness with what that planet represents. And, maybe will help you work with its energy a bit. So, you know,
Yeah.
with Mars,
Veterans,
yeah, veterans is an obvious one.
domestic violence victims.
Yeah,
Mars and Cancer can be working with them, can be donating to
yeah,
shelter.
and that's where I see, planets in fallen detriment or in difficult aspect working most of the time anyway. Like when I think of the charts of people I know who have those placements, they're like paramedics or psychiatric nurses or therapists, or, they volunteer at a shelter or, do some kind of work in their lives related to those difficult circumstances that those placements represent.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's just intuitively makes sense because whether you've experienced that yourself or not, a lot of the times people who have experienced something in that realm themselves are the ones that want to go help other people who have challenges in that area. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the time a chart is like, yeah, you'll see difficult placement, and it's them, helping other people in those
Hmm.
situations or working with people in those situations.
Yeah, and even if, if the placement doesn't represent a difficult circumstance that happened to you specifically, it can represent sort of a higher tolerance or ability to navigate difficult circumstances creatively. So, like, I know a paramedic who has like a really gnarly chart, and it's just like his disposition is just um, like really well suited to that line of work.
Mm-hmm.
Just the way he's really good at keeping his cool, and he's, really good at keeping his head in a crisis, and, he can stomach the work essentially. So it's not so much that like he's endured really traumatic things in his life, but he helps other people who are dealing with traumatic events because he's got the capacity to, walk out into those dark, scary places and face them, which I think is a very debilitated planet quality,
Yeah.
is being able to go into those scary or difficult places, and not be sort of scared away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
I think you are slowly dying.
I'm hungry. I'm so tired. I do like to
And
do things for hours and hours and hours on end, but I like to eat while I'm doing those things, or not be in a closet that the door's shut and a curtain up and soundproofed, and sit in a puddle of my own sweat.
oh, is it hot there?
It's hot in my closet.
Oh yeah, I
All
guess that
these
makes
these
sense.
monitors and electronics going on in here.
Oh no. So this is Mars in the eighth house. You're just like trapped in a hot, dark box.
But I have a mission, so I'm willing to
But you
do
have a
it.
mission.
But I guess there's limits.
Yeah, Mars is willing to do anything if there's a mission.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was just imagining things. I get tired and I think some silly things, but just imagining like it might be a fun thing to do to just like, I don't know. Did you ever, when you were a kid, like you didn't play like war games as much, right?
No, I that interest was sort of nipped in the bud when
Yeah.
I was really young. My parents were very against me playing any kind of violent games or having any toy soldiers or toy weapons or anything like
Mm,
that. So it just wasn't a big part of my childhood.
yeah. I that was a big part of my childhood, and I don't know. Sometimes I like to do it for myself, just like almost like childlike way, like pretend like whatever I need to get done is like a mission. Like I don't
Oh
know, like
yeah.
get into warrior mentality about it, and I don't know, being playful with your chart, I think can be really helpful. Um, and when you're able to like sort of laugh about it and be playful with it, and like I don't know, it sort of like loses its hold over you to some degree. Like, I don't know, maybe not taking it too seriously. And I don't think for a while I was thinking like how looking at your placements or whatever, like a shitty placement, and it also like turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mm-hmm. With the fifth house ruler in the first, so
Yeah.
playfulness is part of the identity of this whole chart.
Mm-hmm. Well, actors, like you see
You
their
know.
roles coming up in their charts so often, and
Mm-hmm.
I can't help but think that that's like that must be remediation in some way. Like, you know, it's
Mm-hmm.
not them, it's the character they played, or
Yeah, like Alan Rickman, playing Snape and having Moon in
I
Scorpio.
love
Like
Alan
so
Rickman's chart.
often I see, yeah, like so often I see actors with all these debilitated planets, and
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't necessarily show up in their personal and professional lives, but it shows up in the roles they
Yeah.
play. And maybe there's some potential, remediation, like you said, in there too, where play the role of
Mm-hmm.
um Mars in Cancer or Mercury in Pisces, or the moon being maltreated or whatever, play that role, as an acting project or something, or, write that character into a piece of writing that you're working on.
Yeah, give it a separate body, maybe than your own, and
Yeah.
send like an offering.
Yeah, an offering, exactly. Oh, I'm really glad you mentioned the self-fulfilling prophecy thing,
Mm-hmm.
because I think people underestimate how powerful that is.
Mm-hmm.
It's extremely powerful, and it has like extremely noticeable societal effects as well. Like our judgments of other people, our prejudgments of other people or certain groups of people, predict their success to some
Oh
extent
yeah.
if we're in positions of authority, right? So certainly in our own lives as well, what we expect for ourselves often comes true. And, that's something that I think we need to be careful about with astrology, where it's really easy for us, if we're in an anxious place, maybe to look at our chart or a transit coming up and be like, well, that confirms the, most catastrophic situation I could imagine in my anxious
Yeah.
brain. And then, you end up creating circumstances that you didn't want. It's not fate, it's we actually have some power
Mm-hmm.
um over our lives, and our expectations have a lot of power.
Yeah, don't give your power away to astrology or to the parents, you know?
Yeah.
Don't like let it divorce you from the agency that you do have.
Hmm.
Obviously, none of us are masters of the universe, but you know, we can choose different things. Changing can take time and it's hard, but it is possible to do.
And I think I mean, maybe the key, there's kind of a balancing act with astrology where, on one hand, we don't want to take it too seriously, and we want to be careful when we're using astrology to talk about negative stuff. We want to be careful because we don't want, people to take it too seriously and then start, become afraid because of a birth chart, which, that's not a great situation. But at the same time, astrology, in order to speak meaningfully about life, needs to have symbols available to it to talk about the most difficult aspects of life. So it's, striking that balance, right? Where it's like, we don't want to be dismissive of what might be genuinely difficult things in somebody's life that they have been able to use astrology to find meaning for, but also, being really careful not to inspire fear.
Yeah.
It's like finding that balance where, like, astrology doesn't dictate your life. It should not inspire fear. But at the same time, it does need to have some scary language in it if you want to use it to talk about things that are difficult in your life, that aren't, necessarily like trying to predict whether or not bad things will happen, but um, making meaning out of maybe difficult circumstances you're already going through or have already been through. Like, I find it's more useful to look at the present or look in hindsight, with that kind of symbolism, instead of looking ahead and predicting doom for yourself.
Yeah. Uh yeah, I guess I want to say like look at how it actually resonates with your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess like don't project, things that aren't that don't resonate with your life onto it, and through that, you can, make really good assessments of your life and see some things you need to patch up if you can.
Mm-hmm.
Or see some things that tend to go more smoothly for you and work it.
Yeah, like ultimately you are the authority on your own life, not your birth chart.
Yeah. Well, is that a good place to wrap it up for today?
I think so.
Well, thank you so much, Jet and Karoliina, for your awesome questions. And I'd like to encourage anyone else that has questions, please, send us your questions at astrologyhotlinepod@gmail.com. We would love to hear them, and we'd love to hear back from Jet and Karoliina as well.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you both so much for these questions. Obviously we got a ton of discussion material out of them. They were excellent questions, really, really interesting and important topics. So, and also just super interesting that your charts are so similar. So thematically, things are all like tied together really nicely between these two charts.
That's where Mystical Kyle shows up, and it's like, that wasn't an accident. I don't know.
Oh, same. That's where my mystical side just loves this. It's just like, yes, this was meant to be.
Yeah. It's funny when first had the idea for this show, I was imagining like Loveline style with like, questions and like 10-minute answers,
Yeah.
It just get longer and longer. So I kind of like that too. I don't know. Maybe we'll do a special episode one day and try it. Like
try to answer 10 questions in an hour
and answer them as fast as possible in a short, succinct way.
That will be a huge challenge for me.
I agree. I like this format just fine. It's just funny how it actually makes a lot more sense. But yeah, what do you got going on these days, Tristan?
I have got the usual things going on. My prices have gone up a little bit for birth chart consultations. So it is $60 for 60 minutes over Zoom. And I can, answer your questions about your birth chart or just give you a general natal chart reading. And if you like it, you're welcome to follow up, and I can look into transits and perfections and more time-based things as well. And you can book a reading with me through my website, which is badsignastrology.ca. And you can also find me on social media. I'm on Instagram at badsignastrology. And I have a blog where I've been posting my astrology writing, which you'll find on my website, but also on Tumblr at badsignastrology. And what about you, Kyle?
Good, consistent branding. The usual. You can book consultation with me at my website. Can't remember the name of my own website, apparently. KylePierceAstrology.com. They have like 5 different irons in the fire. I don't want to talk about any of them until one is actually...
Would you say that your fixed T-square is causing you to put too many irons in the fire?
Oh, yeah, yeah. And the sheer lack of mutability in my chart, it's like... I always like the chess analogy. Just like Cardinal's like your opening move, fixed is like your mid game, and mutable is it's your end game. And actually with chess, my end game is awful. It's really hard for me to like wrap things up. But yet I still want to do, like 6 different things at a time. So
this is why we can't wrap up a show or a conversation because neither of us have enough mutable in our charts. It's just all cardinal.
Yeah, you only have yeah.
I have the same situation.
Well. We both only have a 12th house mutable planet. Yeah.
Trying desperately to wrap everything up.
Yep. So, if I ever finish any of those things, I'll let y'all know. But other than that, that's all I got.
Well, bye for now. Thanks for listening.
Yes, thank you all for listening. Please, if you like the show, please do leave a review. Give us all 5 of your stars. And share it with people. And check out Newsly. It's pretty cool. If you have a question you would like to hear answered on Astrology Hotline, go ahead and send us an email at astrologyhotlinepod@gmail.com.
I'm hitting stop. I'm doing it.